In the middle of the bustling mall, Scott's voice rang out, harsh and unfeeling. "Look at how adorable our child is. Takes after me, doesn't he? And we've got another one on the way. Just look at my wife, you can clearly see she's expecting. But you must be tough being barren and useless. Dumping someone like you was the best decision I ever made." His cruel words, defective, barren, useless, were meant to sting as he flaunted his new, fertile wife with an air of superiority. Despite the sympathetic looks from those around us, I couldn't care less about their pity at that moment. With calm resolve, I decided it was time to reveal a truth he didn't know. "Don't you know? My name is Alyssa. I'm a 34-year-old housewife. Scott, my ex-husband, is 36, 2 years older than me. We met at a social gathering through mutual friends. Scott was the life of the party, the complete opposite of me. At that gathering, I was the shy one, often lingering on the sidelines with awkward conversations. But Scott, with his outgoing nature, made sure I was included. He'd casually say, 'You should have more confidence in yourself, Alyssa. You're so cute,' as we walked home from drinking parties. His upbeat demeanor and genuine encouragement began to warm me up to him. I couldn't help but develop a soft spot for Scott. His straightforwardness was endearing in its own way. As we spent more time together, our connection deepened. We started seeing each other regularly, eventually moving in together and getting married. Our life together was harmonious, buoyed by the affection and support of my kind husband. Despite being a close couple, we struggled to have children. We both wanted a child, so we decided to pursue fertility treatment, though it was really I who took the initiative. Scott was incredibly supportive throughout the process. "It's okay, I'm here," he reassured me. "Even if we can't have children, I'll always be by your side, Alyssa." "I'm so sorry, Scott. I'm really sorry," I'd say, overwhelmed with guilt. "It's not your fault," he'd reply gently. "You don't have to carry this burden alone. Let's take our time." As the months turned into years, my feelings of guilt only deepened. 3 years into the fertility treatments, there was still no sign of a child. Initially, Scott remained patient and kind, but gradually, his frustration began to show. One evening, when I attempted to discuss my cycle and suggested we try to conceive, he simply said, "I'm tired," and turned his back to me, falling asleep. Since then, Scott had been making excuses to avoid intimacy, and we hadn't even tried seriously to determine if we could conceive. Our relationship was facing a crisis before we even had a chance to start a family. Our conversations as a couple had dwindled, but Scott suddenly brought up a topic with an unusually cheerful tone. "I saw a colleague's child the other day for the first time in a while, and he was absolutely adorable." Whether he was aware of my feelings or not, Scott continued to talk about his colleague's child. "Oh, really? I wonder when I'll get to see my own child," I responded, trying to keep my voice steady. Scott's response was tinged with sarcasm, and he began to blame me as if he were a judgmental mother-in-law. "Yeah, but with how things have been lately, I doubt you have a better chance of conceiving." Feeling guilty, I hesitantly tried to address the issue with Scott, but he quickly shot back, "What? I'm just exhausted from work. If it were another woman, this would be resolved without any hassle. Honestly, don't you think you failed as a woman if you can't have children? Try putting yourself in my shoes." I could only stay silent. Each word felt like a dagger to my heart, and I became increasingly afraid to even talk to him. A week later, after finishing my usual examination and treatment at the hospital, I went home determined that this would be my final attempt. When Scott came home, I gathered the courage to speak with him. "Can we talk for a moment?" I asked. "What's up?" he replied, sounding indifferent. "The doctor suggested it might be helpful for you to get checked as well. Would you be willing to go together?" "What? You think there's something wrong with me? That's impossible." "But I heard it's uncommon for husbands not to get tested. Can you please do it?" I asked, summoning all my courage. Even as I pleaded again, Scott's response was harsh. "Are you serious? I've put up with you, someone who lacks charm, and now you want more cooperation from me, trying to blame me for your inability to have children. You're the worst. I just want a child of my own, one that doesn't have to be with you. Do you understand?" His words cut deep, as if saying that my inability to conceive made me a failure as a wife. I was stunned into silence by the shock. All the housework and fertility treatments had been for us, my sacrifices for our existing family and our hopes for the future. But when he criticized me for lacking charm, it was the last straw. My patience, which I had barely managed to hold on to, finally broke. A few days later, Scott casually dropped a bombshell. The other woman is pregnant. Honestly, nothing's happening with us, so I'm going to be with her. It turned out his mistress was a college student and she was expecting his child. It seemed any man would prefer a partner who could give him a child without hesitation, even if it meant belittling me. Though it was infuriating, reflecting on his words, it felt like he had been subtly declaring his affair all along. With a mix of resignation and clarity, I signed the divorce papers Scott had left on the table and submitted them to City Hall. The day after the divorce was finalized, I could have sought damages for Scott's infidelity, but I was still troubled by the childless aspect of our marriage. After consulting with a lawyer, I decided to forego claiming damages in exchange for Scott agreeing to undergo a fertility test. It was my way of getting some measure of retribution. A few days later, I shared my decision with my parents at home. Instead of feeling upset, I was more consumed by anger and regret for not ending things with Scott sooner. My time with him felt like a waste, and my friends encouraged me to embrace a fresh start. 2 years after the divorce, I ran into Scott while shopping at a mall. He was with his new wife, a former college student, and their child. Given that we lived in the countryside, it wasn't surprising to run into each other in a place like this. "Oh, it's been a while. How are you?" Scott said, attempting a casual tone. "Hi," I responded, feeling a mix of emotions. Scott greeted me with a smirk and a condescending attitude, clearly reveling in his new life while flaunting his success. "Look at our kid. So adorable, right? He takes after me. And we're expecting another one too. Just look at my wife. It's obvious she's pregnant. But you. Must be tough being barren and useless. Ending things with someone like you was the best decision I ever made." His words, loud and demeaning, rang through the mall. He took pleasure in boasting about his fertile new wife while insulting me as defective, childless, and a failure. Though people around us cast sympathetic glances, I barely noticed. With a deep breath, I decided to deliver a dose of revenge to my ex-husband. "Well, it's great to see you've found happiness with your new wife and child. But tell me, Scott, how does that reflect on you?" "What? What are you talking about?" Scott asked, clearly confused. "Don't you remember? You agreed to undergo a fertility test instead of pursuing damages. The results are in, and it turns out you were the one who needed fertility treatment, not me. I'm perfectly fine and fertile." "No way. This has to be a joke," Scott stammered, his confidence shaken. "It's the truth," I said calmly, leaning in to whisper in his ear. "If you think it's a lie, why not get a DNA test done on your child? Best of luck with your new family." Panicking, Scott abruptly left me and confronted his wife. From a distance, I heard him shouting accusations like, "You deceived me." Not wanting to escalate the situation further, I gave a brief wave and walked away. After the divorce, my heart had felt heavy and clouded, but the truth brought an immediate sense of clarity. I later learned that the children his wife had given birth to, as well as the one she was expecting, were not Scott's. She had a main partner, the true father of the children, but had married Scott for financial security rather than love. Once it was revealed that the children weren't his, Scott's anger grew, and their marriage quickly deteriorated. His wife, who had never truly loved him, easily returned to the real father of her children. Scott, discarded and left alone, began calling me almost daily, professing his love and begging for reconciliation. He claimed, "I was just captivated by a younger woman, but now I'm clear-headed. You're the only one I truly love." The fact that he had abandoned me when I needed him most was a painful reality I couldn't ignore. His words couldn't erase the past or change my resolve. I was stunned and promptly blocked his number, determined not to revisit the hurtful past. At the time of the mall incident, I was happily remarried and enjoying a smooth sailing life with my new husband and our first child. I had known him from before our marriage. He was a representative from a client company I worked with in my previous job. We had first met in person at a dinner party, but since we had talked frequently over the phone for work, it felt less like a first meeting. Although we had kept in touch, we gradually lost contact after I left my job. Years later, I unexpectedly ran into him in town. He confessed that he had harbored feelings for me when he learned I was getting married but never expressed them. As we started seeing each other again, I found myself drawn to him. Our connection quickly deepened, leading us to marriage. He embraced me completely, even acknowledging the difficulties of my previous marriage. He reassured me with, "You can tell me everything, it's okay." Before we were married, he accompanied me to the hospital for a fertility test, an act that filled me with an unprecedented sense of love and support. I felt truly blessed to have welcomed my first child with a husband who cares deeply for me. A few years later, Scott, who had lost touch and couldn't let go, began showing up around my neighborhood. One day, as I was about to take our child, who had just begun walking, to the park, I spotted Scott. No way, I thought, seeing his shocked reaction to our child. Scott seemed unable to accept the truth of his infertility and was still under the mistaken belief that I was the one who was infertile. From that day on, whenever he saw us, he began insisting that we weren't actually infertile and that the child must have been conceived before our divorce. Of course, that wasn't true. Given the child's age, it was clear that he was the child I had with my new husband. I had been ignoring Scott since we had no direct contact, but his persistent confrontations left me unsure of how to handle the situation. My husband took charge and said firmly, "This child is ours, genuinely. I had a DNA test done because you kept stalking us. Here's the proof. Please stay away from our home." He handed the results to Scott, effectively driving him away. I felt a pang of guilt for causing trouble for my family, as Scott had no place in our current lives. But after sending Scott away, my husband silently held my hand and our child's hand. Though no words were spoken, his support was more than enough. Once our child started attending daycare, Scott, unable to get near our house, began loitering around the daycare when my husband wasn't there. I stayed vigilant, and with the support of the Parents Association and daycare staff, we managed to keep things under control for a while. However, when Scott eventually forced his way into the daycare, we immediately reported him. His presence posed a threat to the children, and the police took him into custody. Despite being restrained by the officers, Scott continued to shout his baseless claim, "That's my child. What's wrong with visiting my own child? Let me go."
My older sister, 28, and I, 24, were once incredibly close. We maintained this bond until a few months ago when my sister, who had recently become engaged to her boyfriend Tyler, 30, suddenly cut off all contact with me. It was a puzzling situation given our close relationship. I had eagerly accepted her invitation to be her maid of honor, actively participating in the wedding preparations. However, around 2 months ago, she inexplicably stopped talking to me. She removed me from the bridesmaids group chat, ignored my calls and texts, and even refused to let me into her house when I visited. The lack of communication and her unexplained behavior left me hurt and confused. My parents were as clueless as I was about this sudden change in her behavior. Despite the silence, I tried to carry on with my life, but her actions continued to weigh on my mind. The final blow came when the wedding invitations arrived, and I did not receive one. It shattered me emotionally, as my sister and I had been inseparable growing up. Still, I respected her wishes and didn't confront her about it. Yesterday, my sister got married, and my emotional state was at its lowest. I spent the day in bed, drowning my feelings in food, feeling awful for not being there as her maid of honor, as we had planned. Then, an unexpected call from my mother brought some clarity. During her wedding speech, my sister mentioned me and accused me of trying to steal Tyler from her at their engagement party. She joked about how I had a history of taking her things, but assumed I would stop at clothes and not go after her future husband. This revelation made everyone uncomfortable, and my mother was furious. I tried to explain to my mother that I hadn't done any such thing, but she was too upset to listen to me. She was angrier with my sister for airing our dirty laundry in front of our family and friends. Since she couldn't confront my sister on her wedding day, I bore the brunt of her anger. Finally, I realized why my sister had cut me out of her life, and I placed the blame on Tyler. A few days before the silent treatment began, I had attended my sister's engagement party, wearing a lavender dress she had bought for me. I had enjoyed some drinks, including champagne, and found myself feeling quite drunk. I refrained from questioning Tyler's intentions when he asked me to accompany him to the kitchen for more snacks. Although I found it odd that he chose me over my sister, I brushed it off as a minor detail. In the kitchen, he complimented my appearance in my dress, and I thanked him. That's when he started suggesting that I didn't need to dress up to catch his attention, implying that I could attract him effortlessly. In my drunken state, I attempted to diffuse the situation with a sarcastic remark, stating that it was my intention all along. I meant it as a joke, but Tyler seemed to take it seriously, staring at me intensely. Just then, my sister walked in, seemingly cheerful, and ushered us out, urging us to enjoy ourselves. I didn't think much of the incident at that time, but looking back, I realized that this might have been the reason for her anger. I regret not addressing it then and there, but I never thought my sister would believe I was flirting with her fiancé. I would never do something like that to her or anyone else. I blame the alcohol for my lapse in judgment. I wish my sister had confronted me about it instead of cutting me out of her life without an explanation. If she had given me a chance to explain, this whole situation could have been avoided. I hold Tyler responsible for the mess, as he was the one flirting with me at his own engagement party. If anyone should have been cut out of her life, it should have been him, not me. Now that I understand the reason for her anger, I'm torn between feeling foolish for my sarcastic response and frustrated that my sister didn't talk to me about it. I'm uncertain how to proceed, especially since I now know the truth about what happened that night. Eventually, after my mother's persistent efforts, my sister agreed to meet me for lunch, and I invited her to my house, hoping to finally resolve this misunderstanding. I hesitated to discuss the matter in front of Tyler. The atmosphere was tense, and my sister appeared distant, which stung a little. Yet, I understood her aloofness now. Despite my understanding, I was put off by the fact that she hadn't bothered to talk to me earlier about what she heard. As soon as we were seated, I didn't waste a moment and swiftly apologized for my sarcastic comment at the party. I clarified that I was incredibly drunk and had intended it as a joke. I emphasized that I would never do anything so disrespectful to her, and I had zero interest in Tyler. The conversation that day had been initiated by Tyler, and I had attempted to lighten the intensity with humor, given my shock at his advances and my intoxicated state. While explaining, my sister looked increasingly perplexed and interjected, claiming she thought I had initiated the conversation. Apparently, after the party, she confronted Tyler, who concocted a story where he painted me as the aggressor. He alleged that he flirted with me that one time because he was afraid I might harm myself or create a scene in my drunken state. To validate his story, he showed her a selfie he had downloaded from my Facebook account, falsely claiming I had sent it to him. According to him, I had been persistently texting him, making him uncomfortable for months. He said today's incident was the final straw. He even shed a few tears to enhance his act, which my sister, unfortunately, fell for. I displayed my inbox, revealing the truth about my limited interactions with Tyler. As I shared this, my sister appeared utterly disoriented, caught between believing her sister and the manipulative tale spun by Tyler. Ordinarily, I would have expected her to unquestioningly trust me, being her sister. However, the situation had become painfully complicated. My sister had just married a man who, as it turned out, had been deceiving her all along, even to the point of lying about me. She felt like her entire world had been turned upside down, and I empathized deeply with her situation. I regretted not being forthright with her that day, choosing instead to avoid confrontation. I knew that if I had spoken up then, this entire mess could have been avoided. Once the truth came out, my sister didn't say much and left, but I understood the turmoil she was going through. Ultimately, the decision of whom to believe rested with her, and I respected that. I had done my part by sharing my side of the story, the truth. Now, all I could do was hope for a positive resolution for both of us. As for Tyler, I had no sympathy for him. He could go to hell, as far as I was concerned. The last time I talked to my sister was a devastating experience for her. Realizing that her husband might not have been truthful and that she could be with the wrong person was a harsh reality. That was 3 days ago, and since then, significant developments occurred. My sister confronted Tyler about his claims regarding me hitting on him. Initially, he vehemently denied it, labeling me a liar with no morals, accusing me of attempting to break them up. However, under my sister's persistent questioning, he eventually confessed. He admitted fabricating the entire story that night, shifting the blame onto me. He tried to pass it off as a drunken mistake, but his lie unraveled. Tyler had intentionally flirted with me, sober and fully aware, initiating the inappropriate conversation that my sister had overheard. To cover his despicable attempt at cheating, he devised an elaborate lie, causing my sister to cut ties with me for weeks over something that wasn't my fault. My sister couldn't forgive Tyler for his deceit. Not only had he attempted to flirt with me at their engagement celebration, but he also lied about it, deeply hurting her trust. They had a heated argument, during which Tyler attempted to gaslight her, shifting the blame back onto her for pressuring him. His attempt to minimize his actions only worsened the situation. This altercation shattered any chance he had at redemption. Frustrated and hurt, my sister left their home and came to me for support yesterday. Instead, she was visibly upset and hardly discussed her feelings, which was concerning since my sister had a tendency to bottle up her emotions until they reached a breaking point, leading to inevitable mental breakdowns. I've already started searching for family attorneys who can assist with an annulment or divorce, whatever the next step may be. I'm certain she won't return to him, given that she hasn't responded to his calls or texts and has instructed me to block him from her phone and delete their pictures together. She simply can't bring herself to do it. It's truly heartbreaking. What it is. Personally, I'm relieved that she's ending the relationship, even though it's been less than a week since they got married. I don't believe Tyler deserves someone as wonderful as my sister. One morning, she saw me quietly crying at breakfast and inquired about the reason for my distress. I hesitated to explain it to her, as I felt responsible for her marriage falling apart in less than a week. If only I hadn't acted foolishly on the night of her engagement party. Instead of responding sarcastically to brush it off, maybe I should have told her what happened that night. Perhaps she would have realized right then and there that he was unfaithful and wouldn't remain loyal to her. That could have saved both of us a lot of heartache and misery. I felt an overwhelming sense of guilt about what had transpired. Fortunately, my sister was understanding and tried to console me. Even in the midst of her own significant ordeal, she reassured me that she didn't blame me. She recognized that I was intoxicated that night and not thinking clearly. She trusted me implicitly and believed that if it had occurred while I was sober, I would have immediately approached her and revealed the truth. The reality was that it never even crossed my mind later on that she might have overheard the conversation, which is why I didn't inform her about it afterward, even when I had sobered up. I was too apprehensive about appearing like a homewrecker, despite not being one. I confessed this to her, and she reassured me that she didn't think any less of me for hesitating to share what had happened, even after I had sobered up. It was a confusing and unprecedented situation for both of us, and she couldn't guarantee that she would have reacted kindly or believed my account of Tyler's advances had I told her. We both made mistakes, but what mattered was recognizing them and striving to improve. Instead of dwelling on the situation, my sister chose to forgive me and encourage me to do the same. I consider myself incredibly fortunate that she decided to be kind and understanding. She truly is the best older sister I could have asked for. Honestly, they are going to file for divorce with mutual consent. It has been a week since my sister moved out, and Tyler made desperate attempts to paint me as the villain, but his efforts were in vain. 3 days ago, he visited us, falling to my sister's feet, pleading for her forgiveness. He made numerous promises, vowing never to repeat his actions, professing his love for her. Despite his emotional appeals, my sister remained resolute, firmly rejecting any possibility of reconciliation. I was present during the entire conversation, and when Tyler realized that my sister wasn't going to blindly believe him, he resorted to blaming me for everything that had transpired. Tyler had the audacity to fabricate lies about me right in front of me. This led to a heated argument between us. He accused me of flirting with him and dropping hints, alleging that I wore that dress just for him and had followed him to the kitchen intentionally. According to him, my laughter at his jokes and supposed stolen glances were signals I had sent his way. It was almost pathetic how he was trying to portray me as the homewrecker. The truth was, I was laughing because I was tipsy, and my laughter wasn't reserved for him alone. His claims about stolen glances were entirely imaginary. I had chosen not to wear my glasses that day and was squinting because I could barely see in the dim lighting. None of his accusations held any truth, and I firmly confronted him, putting him in his place. The argument escalated to the point where my sister had to step in to prevent any physical confrontation. Tyler was in my face, refusing to back down, attempting to intimidate me. However, his efforts were futile. Despite my smaller size, I was trained in jiu-jitsu, and I was prepared to defend myself and my sister if he laid a finger on us. I was on the verge of confronting him physically, ready to teach him a lesson he'd never forget. He was fortunate my sister decided to intervene before things escalated further. Despite his failed attempt to blame me, he resorted to profuse apologies and tears. I feared my sister might fall for his act since he appeared genuinely remorseful, but she instructed me to leave the room while she spoke to him privately. Reluctantly, I stepped out, trusting my sister's judgment, even though I was unwilling to leave her alone with that jerk. After what felt like an eternity, I heard the door close, signaling his departure. My sister appeared visibly dejected, and I patiently waited for her to share their conversation. I didn't want to push her boundaries, so I occupied myself by preparing dinner while she rested in bed. After our meal, she finally opened up to me. She told Tyler that she appreciated the time they spent together, but his betrayal had shattered her trust completely. She calmly explained to him that his willingness to cheat indicated he didn't truly love or want her. Despite the potential embarrassment of divorcing so soon after their marriage, she firmly believed it was the right decision. She didn't want to invest her time in someone who didn't value her for who she was. She pointed out that Tyler's desperation to salvage their relationship stemmed from societal perceptions, not genuine feelings. She knew he cared little about her emotions, and although it was heartbreaking, she couldn't change that fact. With surprising emotion, they bid each other goodbye, tears staining their farewell, leaving me profoundly saddened for her. However, I was relieved that she wouldn't be trapped in an unhappy, loveless marriage. I marveled at how gracefully she handled the situation. That's where the story ends for today. Thank you for listening. If you have your own story, feel free to send us an email. The email address is in the description. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this one. Thank you for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.
Hey everyone, I'm Yasmin, and I want to share a story that sheds light on my incredibly entitled and eccentric mother-in-law, Jessica. My husband Kai suggested sharing this tale because he enjoys reading them from time to time. Before you find it odd, let me clarify that he's well aware of his mother's eccentricities, having been her first victim. Kai's upbringing involved Jessica, who divorced his father shortly after his birth. He experienced her craziness firsthand and distanced himself as much as possible. Unfortunately, Jessica's poor taste in men persisted, leading to another abandonment by Kai's father. While Kai's father paid child support initially, he later terminated his rights. I've never met the man and have no desire to. Claiming to have single-handedly raised Kai, Jessica exploited him to extract money from her family for an extended period. When they grew weary of supporting her, she found a job but continued to siphon money from Kai. During his teenage years, Jessica coerced him into working, all the while pocketing his earnings until he turned 18. Recognizing the need to break free, Kai took out student loans and secured a scholarship for college. That's where we crossed paths. Kai shared the harrowing stories of his mother's behavior, and I couldn't help but be furious on his behalf. I questioned how he could still be in contact with her. He explained, "I was raised by a narcissist. She conditioned me to believe that taking care of her is my responsibility." Distressed by Kai's situation, I used my savings to kickstart his therapy. Although initially resistant, Kai eventually embraced the process, gaining confidence and slowly standing up to his manipulative mother. Recognizing the positive changes, I continued supporting him. Unsurprisingly, Jessica never liked me. During our first meeting, she accused me of being a gold digger who poisoned her son against her. I defended myself, highlighting that I used my money to help Kai access therapy. Over the years, Kai and I graduated, got married, and secured good jobs. Despite working hard for our success, Jessica persisted in her financial demands. She eventually got married to a disrespectful man named Frank, and Kai reluctantly agreed to rent her an apartment. When we bought a house, she expressed her satisfaction, stating, "Heave, I'm so happy that you finally bought a house. I was getting tired of living in an apartment. So when can Frank and I move in?" "Excuse me, what are you talking about?" "Well, I'll be moving into your house with Frank. That's what I'm saying. Why should I live in an apartment when you are housing your wife for free?" "Jessica, we both bought this jointly. I literally co-own this place with Kai. I don't live here for free. You are the one who lives in the apartment for free since Kai pays the rent. Watch your mouth, Jasmine. I don't tolerate disrespect from anyone. I'm talking to my son about his house. I didn't ask you anything. I have the right to talk since it's also my house you are talking about. You're not staying with us, and neither is Frank. That's for my son to decide, and he knows that it's his responsibility to take care of me. I'm already taking care of you, Mom. You don't get to move into my house to raise me. That's not how it works, and there is no chance of an argument, so don't even try. You're acting like an entitled brat, Keith. Your mom worked hard to raise you, and you need to take some responsibility for her. Now, be a good son and give us a copy of your keys so that we can move in. You don't get to say what I do with my house keys, Frank. Neither of you is even getting a copy of our keys. I'll say this for the last time, you two will not be moving into our house. That's it. You would think that's the end of it. Well, it isn't. For days, Frank and Jessica kept harassing us and guilting us. Jessica even said some horrible things to me because she thought I was manipulating Keith and making him abandon her. It was funny at first, but soon we got fed up. One day, Kay went to their apartment to drive it into their heads that they wouldn't be moving in. We thought our point got across since we stopped hearing from them. Problem solved. Well, not quite. A month after we moved into our house, we had a small vacation coming up. After saving for years, we finally decided to go on a break to celebrate our house purchase. It was supposed to be a relaxing vacation for the two of us by the beach. We both took time off and decided to take things easy for that week. We flew there and had a blast from the first day itself. But as evening came, something shocking happened. I got a notification from the Ring camera on my house's door. Yes, we did set up surveillance cameras before we went on vacation since we didn't ask anyone to house sit. We thought that it would be important. Now, I had no idea who would even show up at the door. The neighborhood is pretty safe, and we have lived there before. Hardly anything ever happened there, so I was curious why there was so much activity at the house. I opened my phone to see what the hell was going on there. What I found in the live camera footage shocked me. There I saw my dear mother-in-law Jessica and her new husband Frank moving into our freaking home. Yes, they somehow got into our house and brought 12 bags of clothes. Literally 12 freaking bags. They were moving into the guest room and setting up everything there. Jessica even went into the kitchen to make herself some food. I was shocked and angry at what I was witnessing. I knew that I needed to tell Keith immediately. So, I called him over and said, "Keith, I have some news. I think we need to talk about it right now. Right now." "What's so important, Yasmin? We're on vacation. I'm kind of not in the mood for any serious stuff today." "Trust me, Keith, I'm not in the mood to deal with horrible people either. But this situation is dire and needs our immediate attention. I'm afraid it's about your mother. Mom's making trouble again." "Oh God, what is it this time? Did she manage to break into our house or something?" From the look I gave Keith, it became apparent to him that he wasn't off the mark. His eyes immediately turned into saucers as he tried to make sense of the situation. I pulled out my phone and showed him what Jessica and Frank were doing. He was shocked and looked very angry at what he was seeing. I mean, his joke turned out to be the truth. His mom broke into our new house and was moving in furniture with her husband. Keith looked a little pissed off and said, "You can leave it to my mother to surprise me in the worst way possible." Looks like she didn't take the hint at all. We made it clear that day that she won't be living with us. I'm even surprised as to how she got the keys to our house. It just blows my mind. Her new husband is a sleazy guy, Yasmin. We both know that. I'm afraid he may have gotten his hands on our keys and made a copy. I wouldn't put it past him. We will need to go back and change the locks. That's the only way we can make sure that they don't budge into our house anytime they like. But what do we do about this current problem? Do you have something in mind? Look, I know they are your parents and all, but I really want to call the cops on them. What they are doing is illegal and downright scary. They can't be trusted anymore. Either calling the cops and getting no contact with them is the best solution possible. I gave Keith some time to turn the idea in his head. I could see that he was thinking hard and had grim lines on his forehead, but it didn't take too long for him to come back with a response, and his response was way better than I imagined. He said, "You know what, Yasmin? Let's do it." "What? Are you sure about that? There'll be no going back once we do this, and the cops will drag your mom and Frank to the streets with all their things." "I know that, Yasmin. I've given them enough chances to improve themselves. They just betrayed my trust every time. I have to stop somewhere. There has to be some consequences. What they did today is not only a breach of our privacy but also illegal. I think it's time they realize they can't do whatever they want. Would you go no contact with them as well?" Of course, my reluctance to do that has already created a lot of problems. I should have done this a long time ago. I'm freaking stupid and thought Mom would grow some sense after I got married. Since that's not happening, I'm going to distance myself from them. It's the only way, and I am actually feeling good about it. Okay then, if you're on board with it, let's proceed with that plan. But first, let's call your mom and give her a warning. Just a final chance to make this right. I don't have any hope, but we can get evidence that we didn't allow her in our house. Keith agreed with the plan and called his mother. She didn't pick up the first time through the security cameras. I could see that she was visibly annoyed and went to Frank. They discussed something before answering the call. When we rang the second time, she put the phone on loudspeaker so that Frank could join in as well. She said, "Hey Keith, how are you doing? Is the vacation going fine? You need to tell me what's going on over there." "I don't know what you're talking about. Everything is just breezy here. Nothing to worry about really." "Jessica, you and Frank breaking into our house is nothing to worry about." Jessica went quiet when I said that. On the security tapes, we could see that she tensed and looked at Frank again. I mean, Frank was better at fooling and manipulating people, so this was expected. Jessica wanted her new husband to come up with some plan. "What are you even talking about, Yasmin? Kay, your wife has gone crazy. You need to shut her up." "Don't talk to my wife like that. We know what you two are up to. With cameras in the house, both inside and out, there's no point in lying to us. We can see you on our phones right now." "Wait, what? How dare you spy on us, Keith? This is unacceptable. What about our privacy? You should have been more thoughtful." It was ironic how Jessica was offended by the fact that we could see their activities on our screen. She talks about respecting people's privacy when she broke into someone's house and made it her own. I didn't know if Jessica was trying to deflect or if she was genuinely offended. I have a good guess that it's a little bit of both. Her words sparked something in me, and I said, "That's rich coming from you, Jessica. You are the one who broke into our private home when we clearly told you that you are not allowed in." "I don't care what you say, Yasmin. It's my son's house too, so I have the right to be here. I'm his mother and should be staying with him." "I already said no to that, Mom. Just because you're my mother doesn't mean you will go wherever I go. You already have an apartment that I pay for. Who wants to live in that tiny apartment when you have brought such a big house?" "You're turning into such a selfish man after getting married, Keith. This is unacceptable. You can't expect your own mother to live in an apartment while you enjoy a whole house with your wife. That decision is not up to you, Mom. You shouldn't have just packed up your stuff and moved into the house. How did you even get the keys?" Both me and Kay were troubled by this question and needed answers immediately. Also, we needed them to confess to their wrongs so that we could use that to report them to the police. And our hunch was right. Frank said, "Well, since you decided to be a brat and ignore your mother, I went and made a copy of your keys." "Who the hell told you to touch my keys? I didn't give you permission to do that." "I don't need your permission, Kai. I'm your stepdad. I have the authority to do what I think is right. You don't get to question me." "I don't care who you are to me, Frank. I'm a grown-ass man and don't need a parent. What you did was forgery, and both are offenses under the law." "Kai, how dare you talk to Frank like that? He only did this because he knew I was sad. A mother should have the keys to her son's house for emergencies and all, you know? For emergencies and breaking in whenever you want? You're insane, Jessica. You need to get off our property with all your stuff within an hour. If you don't, we will call the cops." That made Jessica and Frank look frightened. They visibly panicked and whispered something amongst themselves. Their panic was clear on their faces, and we could see that through the cameras. In the end, they said, "Don't threaten us, woman. This is not your house. This is my son's house. Only he gets to make those decisions. This house belongs to both Yasmin and me, and we both want you to get out before I'm forced to call the cops." "Trust me, Mom, that will be ugly." "What an ungrateful brat you are, Keith. How can you threaten to kick out your mom?" She was given a warning and didn't listen. Now both of you will be facing consequences. You have exactly 1 hour to vacate my house before I call the cops. Remember that I have you on surveillance and I will know what you are doing. Frank and Jessica started to yell at us when we hung up. We didn't want to go into an argument with them anymore. Their entitled brains were not meant to participate in conversations or healthy discussions. They didn't care about anything but themselves. We gave them 1 hour while we put all the proof into a folder. Through the cameras, we could see that they were having a discussion but didn't budge. Instead, Jessica started to unpack her bags. That made us both angry as hell. As the hour passed, we called the police with all the evidence we had. Thankfully, they took us seriously and went to our house. We saw the whole fiasco unfold in front of our house. The cops went there and knocked at the door. Jessica and Frank opened the door and immediately faked being confused. After the officers told them everything, they called us and sang a different tune. They said, "Kay, why was there a need to call the cops? We just want to live with our son. Why are you making things so difficult? Tell the cops that this was all a misunderstanding." "I don't want you living with me, Mom. I said that 100 times now. Stop being so freaking entitled. Leave before the cops arrest you and we are forced to press charges." "Kay, don't do this. Please look, we have nowhere to go. You need to let us stay here. Just tell the cops to leave. We will have a calm discussion about this once you come back." "Absolutely not, Mom. You need to back up and go to your apartment. I want my house empty today and right now, Keith. Actually, we can't go back to the apartment. I canceled the lease and sold my furniture. We really have nowhere to go. I thought that she wouldn't mind living with us, so I canceled the lease myself." The audacity of this woman shocked me to the core. She canceled her lease because she thought she could force us to house her. She was freaking insane. He was boiling with rage and ready to scream at her sorry ass. He said, "You went behind my back and canceled your lease? What the freaking hell, Mom? You know what? That's not my problem. I don't care where you go. You need to vacate my house." No, Keith. Please listen to me. I've nowhere to go. Don't kick us out. I'm your mother. Do you want your mother to be homeless? You made yourself homeless, Mom, since you don't want to stay in a rented apartment anymore. I won't give you rent money anymore. I'm freaking done. You can take your new man and figure out something for yourself. Get out of my house and don't try to contact me again. At this point, Jessica was literally crying and begging to make us hear her out. She even cried to me and brought up my dead mother to guilt me. They had the very opposite reaction than what she expected. Me and Key got so mad that we shouted at them and hung up. We immediately blocked the numbers because they crossed all our boundaries in one day and somehow made things worse than ever. The cops stayed back at the house and made sure that Jessica and Frank left. I called a mutual friend to help house it until we came back. She also assured me that she would call a locksmith to change our door lock the next day. She's a friend from college, and we trust her a lot. We knew that she would make sure our house was safe. She lived in an apartment, so it was easy for her to come to the house. Frank and Jessica left and went to God knows where. My guess is they spent the night at the hotel and bought new phone numbers to harass us. It didn't work. No relative took their side either because they knew Jessica well enough, and they didn't want to be in her drama. Also, they told her in no uncertain terms that they wouldn't house or help her out in any way. That made Jessica focus her attention back on us. For the rest of our vacation, we kept our phones switched off. We opened our phones once daily to check for emergencies, and that's it. We also only called our friend to make sure everything was all right. Yes, Jessica and Frank did show up again and tried to get in. They left after the friend threatened to call the cops again. We're thinking of sending a cease and desist letter before they escalate their behavior. Thankfully, they didn't want to know why. When we got back from vacation, we found out that Frank had decided to leave Jessica. Why, you may ask? Because she couldn't house and feed him for free anymore. Jessica was devastated and begged her son to talk to her. She finally realized that she needed her son for money. He didn't soften at all. He stuck to the no-contact decision that is still in place today. The last we know from family is that Jessica rented a trailer and still works at the retail store with no hope of retirement in sight.
My husband has a new stepmom, and she's pretty young, only 10 years older than me. Well, that's not the dilemma. I'm pregnant, and so is she. Now, in a family dinner, she announces that she doesn't believe the baby actually belongs to my significant other, aka her new son. Can you imagine the drama that unfolds when I demand, "Fine, how about we just take a DNA test? And besides, if I have to take a DNA test, you do too." Fair warning, this is going to be long. I just really wanted to share this with someone who isn't always caught up in a mess with me. There's a lot of background, but I promise it's worth it. My husband, Jay, and I just got back from our honeymoon a couple of weeks ago. This wedding has been a long time in the making. We've been together since high school, but friends all our lives. Since we didn't do anything big for the ceremony, we decided to go all out for the honeymoon. I'm talking a month and a half in all our favorite spots across the world. The best hotels, the best food, you name it, and we had it. I'm not saying any of this to brag. I just wanted to give you as accurate of a picture as possible. Considering we were gone for such a long time, Jay's father, my father-in-law, wanted to have a welcome back dinner to catch up. He's a total sweetheart, and both Jay and I adore him. So Jay accepted without running it by me first. Usually, this would not be a problem. We get along great and have ever since I've known him, which is pretty much my whole life, considering our families used to live next door to each other. We moved closer to my mom's family after my dad passed, but since I stayed in the same school, Jay's family has been a big part of my life. Jay's stepmother is a different story, though. Jay's mom passed away when we were in our junior year of college, and she and father-in-law have been separated for a while by then. But it still crushed both him and Jay to lose her. I think his heartbreak is why he moved on quickly and remarried, basically by the end of that year. Father-in-law married Jay's stepmother, whom I'll be calling mother-in-law for simplicity's sake. The year Jay and I graduated from college, it was a little weird that she was only 10 years older than us. And when they had their twins 3 years ago, I was a little concerned about father-in-law being too old to have young children. But I didn't really want to judge someone who's particularly a second father to me, especially since Jay was just happy that his father seemed happy. Mother-in-law, on the other hand, had no trouble judging. From the get-go, she was super competitive whenever it came to anything to do with me. If Jay bought me a necklace, she had father-in-law buy her a more expensive one. If somebody mentioned that I made a good apple pie, she would just happen to make one the next day. She even announced her pregnancy at a dinner celebrating my promotion. I don't know if she's jealous of my relationship with father-in-law or what, which aside from being super gross implications, is just plain unwarranted. But she's been awful to me since we met. I've never brought it up with my father-in-law because I don't want to cause problems in his marriage. But whenever I've said anything to Jay, he just brushes it off and says stuff like I'm reading too much into stuff. When I brought up the pregnancy announcement, his only defense was that father-in-law was hosting the dinner, so technically she was allowed to announce whatever the heck she wanted in her own home. It's been a huge point of contention between us. When we decided to get married, I made it a point that he would have to be on my side from this point on. I get that she was his stepmother, but I was going to be his wife. He agreed, and that was that. So we get married, and I could not be happier. When Jay told me that he'd accepted father-in-law's invitation for dinner, I was a bit hesitant, to say the least. We had just gotten back from the happiest weeks of our lives, and I did not want mother-in-law to ruin that. Jay convinced me by saying that it would be the perfect time to announce my pregnancy. We found out that I was pregnant about 6 weeks before we got married, and we decided not to tell anyone just yet, aside from my mom, who was with me when I did the test. And since we were planning on getting married eventually anyway, we decided to elope. Our families were shocked, but ultimately, my mom and Jay's dad were happy for us, especially considering we've been together for such a long time. Father-in-law paid for our honeymoon as a wedding present, which his travel agent handled completely. It was a dream, I could not imagine how happy he would be when we announced that I was pregnant with his first grandchild. I agreed to go, but told Jay that if mother-in-law tried to pull anything, I would not be tolerating it. Jay agreed and promised to have my back, no matter what. Father-in-law loves hosting dinners in his home. We chose an intimate setting to announce the pregnancy. Things seemed fine when we arrived, and father-in-law warmly hugged both of us. Even though mother-in-law only hugged Jay, we exchanged polite smiles, and I thought that was the end of it. We chatted in the sitting room for a while before moving to the dining room for dinner, where father-in-law served us each a glass of wine. Thinking it was a good time, I politely declined the wine, stating that we wouldn't be having any drinks for the upcoming months. It took father-in-law a moment to catch on, but Jay burst out, "Dad, we're pregnant." This finally got a reaction out of him, and he was overjoyed. Putting down the wine, he gave me a hug, asking when we found out and if we knew the gender yet. Mother-in-law, however, remained completely silent during father-in-law's congratulations and only spoke up when things calmed down, suggesting we sit down to eat. It wasn't her I wanted to share the news with anyway. As we sat down to eat, father-in-law spent most of the dinner asking us questions about the honeymoon and the pregnancy. He and Jay excitedly discussed fatherhood and the kind of father Jay would be. It was heartwarming to see my husband so excited about our growing family. At that moment, I knew I had picked the right man to start a family with. Mother-in-law kept interjecting into their talk, mainly discussing what the twins were like when they were newborns and how Jay's dad had reacted when they were born. Essentially, she redirected the attention back to herself and her kids. When I mentioned the crib we were considering buying for the nursery, she suggested we wait, stating we didn't know where we would be once the baby's born. Confused, I pressed her, and she insinuated that Jay and I might not be together when the baby is born. At this point, I was annoyed and getting angry. I asked her why she thought that, and she brought up our history of breaking up and getting back together. I defended our relationship, stating that every couple has ups and downs, and we're married adults, not emotional teenagers. My voice may have been raised, but considering the accusations, I think it was reasonable. Father-in-law tried to calm her down, but she was determined to say her piece. I told Jay I wanted to go home, and before he could stand up, she insisted he get a paternity test before buying the crib. Father-in-law immediately told her to shut up, and Jay walked me out, fuming on the entire car ride home. I was upset not only at mother-in-law, but also at Jay, who had promised to have my back. He sat silently while his stepmother tore me apart. He assured me he would handle it and let mother-in-law know her behavior wasn't okay, but I'll believe it when I see it. Crushed by the hurtful words from someone important to my husband and father-in-law, I've only confided in my best friend, who thinks mother-in-law may be jealous of the relationship I have with Jay and father-in-law. I hope this isn't a sign of how my pregnancy will go, and if anyone has had similar experiences, please share below. More than anything, I'm just upset that what was supposed to be a happy moment got ruined by my mother-in-law. Top comments from the original post express similar sentiments. Comment number 1 states that this isn't just a mother-in-law problem, it's a husband problem. The commenter points out that the husband should have stood up for me the moment the mother-in-law opened her mouth, especially after promising to have my back. There's concern about whether this is a recurring issue and if the husband will continue to remain silent in the face of such situations. The commenter suggests reaching out to a support system and preparing for a potential future of defending myself and my child if the husband doesn't step up. Comment number 2 takes a different perspective, suggesting that the marriage might have happened solely because of the pregnancy, not mature love. The commenter speculates about the possibility that the baby isn't the husband's, hence the mother-in-law's demand for a paternity test. There's an implication that the mother-in-law might know something that the father-in-law and stepson don't. The commenter advises me to admit any jealousy towards the mother-in-law, projecting that she married a stable family man while I was strung along for 10 years with an on-and-off-again boyfriend. In the first update, I acknowledged the husband's failure to defend me adequately and our subsequent discussion about the need for him to speak up sooner in the future. There's mention of the impossibility of limiting contact with the in-laws due to Jay's work with his father, who runs several restaurants. The family's closeness is highlighted, and the difficulty of implementing low or no contact during pregnancy is explained. The update concludes with relief that an upcoming family event won't involve seeing the mother-in-law. Moving to the actual update, a dinner meeting is arranged with the father-in-law and mother-in-law to sort things out. Despite my preference for a neutral location, the father-in-law insists on hosting again. The dinner doesn't even begin before Jay addresses the issue, expressing regret for not saying anything the last time. He firmly informs his stepmother that her suggestion was ridiculous and unwarranted, emphasizing his trust in my loyalty. Father-in-law apologizes for letting the situation persist. When the mother-in-law attempts to apologize, I request that she waits until I've spoken. I acknowledge my raised voice, but explain that it was warranted given the implications of her statement. I agree to a paternity test, but only if she undergoes one as well, pointing out the inconsistency in her questioning the parentage of my unborn child, while never questioning her own children's paternity. When I tell you that I've never witnessed a grown woman losing her composure as loudly as she did, you'd be genuinely shocked by the volume she reached. She immediately tried to throw herself at me across the coffee table. her words becoming completely unintelligible by that point. I won't repeat the things she said to me, but Jay and I removed ourselves from the situation right away. It's been a day since we went over, and Jay has been on the phone with his father almost continuously since the twins have been with Jay's aunt since yesterday afternoon. I think they'll remain there until father-in-law can get my mother-in-law to calm down. This is definitely not over yet, but I hope everything calms down soon for the sake of the children. Update number 2. Before I go on with the update, I want to thank everyone who read and responded to my initial post and update. They were long, venting out years of built-up stress into these extensive texts. I'm grateful that people took the time to reply with their experiences. Despite the unfortunate commonality of similar stories, it's hopeful to hear about situations that have improved. I've received mixed responses about agreeing to the paternity test only if she did it too, which I expected. Honestly, it's the only solution that seemed moderately fair to me. Anyways, on to the meat of the update. I did end up going through with the test. As insulting as it was, I knew that if I didn't, there would always be that lingering shred of doubt. And that's not the family I want to bring my child into. I chose a doctor who runs his own practice, a friend of mine. He collected the samples, and the results would be available in a few days. Shockingly, the child is my husband's. Jay wasn't surprised when I told him, but I could sense some tension released from his conscience. Considering the emotional turmoil my mother-in-law put me through, I didn't stop there. I didn't do anything drastic. Nobody was harmed. My condition for going through with the test was that mother-in-law gets her own children checked, and I intended to go through with that regardless of her participation. The twins were with Jay's aunt, and I managed to get Jay's cousin to get a cheek swab of each of them, just to bring to my doctor friend. We ran the twins against Jay, which served the same purpose. The emotion I felt when it came back that the twins were not related to Jay was mixed. On one hand, I was vindicated that mother-in-law had been projecting, but on the other hand, the lives of these innocent children were about to be uprooted because their mother had to butt into other people's business. Currently, the only person aware of these results is Jay. We're taking some time to decide on the next step, as we don't want to harm the twins, regardless of whether they're related to Jay. If anything comes of it, I'll post an update, but for now, we just want to do what's best for our family. Update number 3. I'm gutted, absolutely gutted, and have no idea what to do. I feel completely blindsided and betrayed by the man who promised me forever and is now siding with a woman who verbally abused me in his home. Father-in-law and mother-in-law called us over yesterday afternoon. I had hoped that mother-in-law had finally come to her senses and was ready to apologize for everything she said to me. Unfortunately, I could not have been further from the truth. Upon arriving at the house, I already knew that something was off. Father-in-law usually greets us at the door with a warm hug and smile, but this time, he just held the door open silently and then went to sit beside mother-in-law in the dining room. No tea and snacks in the sitting room, no quick catch-up, nothing. We followed and sat down across from them. Father-in-law passed us a stack of papers and asked us if we knew that they were the results of the paternity test that my friend had performed for my child and the twins. I was completely caught off guard, as there was no way that father-in-law and mother-in-law should have access to those documents, as neither Jay nor I had contacted them about it. Jay was just as confused as I was, but father-in-law did not give us time to process anything before passing us another set of papers, both regarding the twins' parentage. It stated that Jay was the half-brother of both twins, which clearly contradicted the results on the first set of papers. Father-in-law explained that they had conducted a DNA test at a local clinic, saying that he had recently run a DNA test for the twins at the request of a relative. He felt obligated as a doctor to inform the parents of the situation. My friend had contacted father-in-law to tell him about the paternity test that I had him perform on the twins. But he didn't stop there. Father-in-law revealed that my friend sent over the results along with edited documents that stated the twins had no relation to Jay. My friend told him that I requested the documents to be edited. Jay asked me if this was true, but I was so caught off guard by the betrayal of my friend that I just froze. Unfortunately, father-in-law took this as an invitation to keep speaking. This is a man I've looked up to for most of my life, whom I held as a father figure after the death of my own father. And he had no remorse in telling my husband, his own son, that my friend had edited the results of my own paternity test. He had absolutely no empathy for the fact that I just wanted to give my child the best possible father it could have. I wanted Jay to be the father. I just don't see what father-in-law gains from tearing down everything that I was trying to build for my family. The whole time, mother-in-law just sat there with this stupid, smug look on her face, not saying a word. It was her fault any of this was happening in the first place, and she just sat there and smiled at me as though I was at fault for wanting to ensure that my children had a stable life with a reliable father. Jay was absolutely livid. I've never seen the man I love so angry, let alone directed at me. At first, I hoped that I could reason with him, but when it became crystal clear that he was unwilling to listen to me, I called my mother to come pick me up. I've been with her for the last few days, and Jay has not tried to contact me. Father-in-law and mother-in-law have not picked up any of my calls or responded to any of my text messages. My friend, the doctor who caused this whole mess, has completely ghosted me on everything. I plan to go down to his practice to confront him soon, but I just want to fix things with Jay first. I simply don't know what to do. I don't know how my life went from the perfect honeymoon and designing my dream nursery to this. Update number 4. For those of you tearing me apart in the comments section, you'll be happy to hear that Jay and I are separated. He told me that he's looking into an annulment. Father-in-law had the audacity to contact my mother about everything that happened, and even she's not happy with me right now. I'm completely isolated and alone, and the only person still on my side is my best friend, who has supported me through this whole mess without judgment. I really tried to remove myself from the situation and take the high road, but considering father-in-law's lack of tact and his willingness to interfere with my family, I just decided that I would fight fire with fire. I can't be bothered with people like the doctor who went behind my back to contact Jay's family. There are no records of our interactions, and pursuing that angle would be an all-around pointless matter for me. However, I mentioned in a previous update that father-in-law runs a few restaurants in my city. The way that he was able to grow his business so quickly was by employing cheap immigrant workers. Of course, father-in-law was more than willing to turn a blind eye if they happened to be undocumented, provided they did good work. Unfortunately for father-in-law, a good Samaritan alerted the relevant authorities to this fact, and considering, I have not been in contact with either my husband or his family since the ambush at dinner. I only know what little my mother tells me about it. From what I've heard, father-in-law has been fined a few thousand, and it's possible that his business license will be suspended. This would impact not only his livelihood and approaching retirement, but also Jay, quite a few other members of the extended family who were involved in the business. While it pains me to see a family that I held so dear for so long go through such a difficult time, I can't help but feel that this is karma. Father-in-law could not keep his wife out of my family's business, and now his family business is under fire. I wish I knew how Jay felt about all this. If we had not been separated, I would be doing my best to support him during this trying time for both him and his family. It's with a heavy heart that I've resigned myself to watching their hard work and livelihood go up in flames. None of this would be happening if mother-in-law had simply chosen to be happy for us and welcome our child into the family with open arms, just as we had welcomed her and her twins. I sincerely hope that they're able to heal from this, but for now, I'll just have to prioritize myself and my child. I don't have time to care about their family drama anymore. Update number 5. I never thought I'd be coming back to update, but since my last post, here I am. I don't know what ended up happening with my former father-in-law's business license, and frankly, I don't care. Jay and his family are dead to me, and they can continue living their picture-perfect life far away from me. I do know that he had to pay a hefty fine, and one of Jay's uncles, whom Jay was never a fan of, has taken over father-in-law's position for now. Overall, I'm more than happy with how my life has gone since exiting the toxic family. I've moved back in with my mom, who loves the company. She's come around to my point of view, given her desire to have a healthy relationship with her grandchildren, which I was so happy to see. The biggest update is that I've since started seeing the soon-to-be father of my child. We connected during a break that Jay and I were on before our engagement, and have since reconnected through a friend of my best friend. I'll be due any day now, and the father of my child will be by my side every step of the way. I'm overjoyed that I'll be able to bring my little bundle of joy into a complete family with a mother and a father who will love them unconditionally. So, thank you to those who commented on and interacted with my post positively, and to those of you who DM'd me support and my choices despite the onslaught of hate and ridicule from other commenters. It means more to me than I could ever express. I hope that each of you was able to find a happy ending that I know we all deserve. Top comments from the original post and all the updates. Comment number 1. I'm just glad everything worked out for you in the end. I know I'm going to get attacked from commenters into oblivion, but I don't care. You clearly have so much love in your heart for your family and your unborn child, and you just want to create the best possible life for them. I completely empathize as someone who grew up in a broken home with parents who were constantly at war with each other. I wish that my mother had done what you tried to do. Lord knows we would have had a better life today if she did. All the love and light to you and your kid. May your little family find peace away from the mess in your past, and may your relationship with your partner grow stronger every day. Comment number 2. I don't even know what to say. I mean, lady, you're crazy. This is what they say, don't stick your something in crazy. Did you report his father to the authorities? You might have gotten this man's livelihood taken away. I mean, a man with 2 young children that you claim to love and want the best for, like, holy hell, you're insane. I don't even want to get into the fact that you convinced a doctor to falsify test results so that you could, get your ex-mother-in-law thrown out. Like, what was even the goal there? Not even getting into the ethics of a doctor actually going through with what he did. The fact that you're trying to frame it as a betrayal of your trust is unhinged. I actually don't know how to react. Like, this can't be real, right? Please tell me that this type of crazy isn't just roaming the streets and procreating. God help your child. Get some help? OP. Okay, so what we just had revealed to us in these last 2 comments that we reviewed are completely opposite opinions. The very first comment is basically 100% in the backing of OP. The second comment said OP is a crazy lady. I mean, everything that she did, from the faking of the documents to getting the doctor friend to help, it just all led to pure toxicness. But I want to know, do you guys think that maybe it was justified given the mother-in-law's attitude throughout the whole story, and OP just wanted some sort of revenge? I want to know your thoughts about that. So go ahead, drop it down below in our comment section, guys. Thank you so much for joining me on today's video. My name is Mr. Reddit, and I narrate these sorts of stories every single day. So if you want to be a part of these, all you have to do is subscribe. I'll see you guys tomorrow, and just remember, it's cool to be kind. Peace. 8 years ago, I, a 54-year-old man, went through a divorce with my then 48-year-old wife. Following the separation, my 28-year-old daughter chose to sever all ties with me, aligning herself with her mother without seeking my perspective. Despite the passage of nearly a decade, accepting the outcome of my divorce and finding peace in my life has been a challenging journey. My ex-wife's attempts to tarnish my reputation played a role, but the primary struggle stemmed from the deep affection I held for my daughter. As an adult at the time of the divorce, her decision to exclude me from her life left me powerless. Without any other family besides my mother, who suffered from Alzheimer's, this ordeal marked one of the most distressing periods of my life. Despite numerous attempts to reach out to my daughter after the divorce, she remained steadfast in siding with her mother, unwilling to hear my side of the story. At one point, my ex-wife even took legal action against me, accusing me of harassment if I persisted in trying to connect with my daughter. Faced with such explicit warnings, I reluctantly ceased my attempts to reach out. For the past 8 years, I dedicated myself to caring for my ailing mother and focusing on my career. Although I engaged in a few casual relationships, the scars from my divorce left me with a profound difficulty in trusting others. This has been the narrative of my life for almost a decade, and I apologize if my tone seems somber. The reason I am sharing this story now is that recently, my daughter reached out to me. Overjoyed by the prospect of reconnecting, I initially believed she had reconsidered her stance on the divorce. This development was particularly comforting as my mother had recently passed away, and I found myself grappling with grief and a desire for familial support. A few months after my mother's passing, I received a call from an unfamiliar number. On the other end was a woman's voice, introducing herself as my daughter. Surprised and unable to recognize her voice after such a long estrangement, I learned that she had seen on Facebook that her grandmother had passed away and wanted to check on me. Grateful for her concern, we engaged in conversation, and she suggested meeting in person. Excited about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship, we arranged to meet at my house over the weekend. Eager to reconnect, I cooked dinner for her. The moment arrived, and as I opened the door, I was both nervous and excited. It had been nearly a decade since our last encounter, and she was just a little girl back then. Despite the initial awkwardness, we gradually opened up to each other. She shared details about her life and work, and I reciprocated with information about my experiences. After dinner, we finally broached the unspoken topic in the room. I asked her why she had never considered my perspective during the divorce and had defaulted to choosing her mom. I acknowledged that her mother had been a more present figure as a stay-at-home mom, contrasting with my demanding construction job. My daughter expressed regret, acknowledging that she was too young to fully understand the situation and had been manipulated by her mother's portrayal of me as the ultimate villain. Since she never heard my side of the story, she never questioned her decision. We continued our conversation, delving into various topics, until she eventually disclosed the true reason for her sudden reconnection. Hours into our discussion, I couldn't help but inquire about the catalyst that prompted her to reach out after such an extended period. Her demeanor shifted, and sensing her discomfort, I reassured her that honesty was welcomed. She hesitated before revealing that she had been monitoring my activities on Facebook. Learning about her grandmother's passing, she anticipated legal representatives would approach her regarding the inheritance. When that didn't happen, she decided to contact me directly. While expressing condolences for my loss, she disclosed her recent engagement and conveyed a need for financial assistance with wedding expenses. The revelation hit me like a punch to the gut. Hopes of rekindling a family bond were shattered as it became apparent that her motives were rooted in financial gain. Ironically, the inheritance legally belonged to me, and her attempt to leverage our connection for personal benefit was disheartening. Money was never a priority for me. I lived modestly, with no extravagant hobbies, and bought my clothes from Target. Even if the inheritance were rightfully hers, I would have gladly contributed to her wedding expenses had she approached me sincerely. Amidst the whirlwind of emotions, I maintained composure and questioned if financial support was her sole objective. Her defensive response emphasized that the inheritance was secondary, and her primary goal was to reconnect. She expressed regret for not reaching out earlier, attributing her silence to fear of my unforgiving reaction to being abruptly cut off without an explanation. Skepticism lingered as I wondered if her motives were genuine or driven solely by financial gain. Curious about her claim to the inheritance, I inquired further. She recounted a conversation with my late mother a couple of years before the divorce, where she allegedly expressed a desire for my daughter to inherit everything from my father, who had passed away years ago. Understanding the dynamics of my family at that time, I acknowledged the possibility that my mother might have made such a statement. However, the crushing realization that her apparent interest in reconnection was centered on financial gain left me devastated. Choosing to test her intentions, I asked about the amount she expected from the inheritance. Her accurate estimate hinted at meticulous planning. Seizing the moment, I disclosed that her grandmother had left everything to me years ago, intending to use the money to start a business. Her reaction to this revelation would be the litmus test for the authenticity of her intentions. Regrettably, I couldn't fulfill her request for financial assistance, but I offered to contribute a substantial amount from my own funds toward her wedding expenses. The disappointment etched on her face confirmed my apprehensions. While expressing gratitude, she insisted that, as the sole grandchild, she deserved a portion of the inheritance, asserting that it was rightfully her grandmother's money. I conveyed my sincere desire to help, explaining that my decision was final. Her reaction was visceral. Her face turned red, and anger simmered visibly. She implored me to reconsider, but I stood firm, emphasizing the importance of doing what felt right to me. It was then that she unveiled her true feelings, delivering a hurtful remark affirming her belief that I was the selfish person her mother claimed I was. Her declaration stung, though I had anticipated such sentiments. Cutting her off before she could continue, I expressed disappointment in her manipulative approach and called out her attempt to exploit my grief for her own gain. I laughed off her accusation, pointing out the irony that had she not blocked me years ago, she would have received my messages about her grandmother's situation. Encouraged by her confusion, I asked her to unblock me, allowing me to resend the texts. As she read through the messages, which included pleas for understanding and notifications about her grandmother's Alzheimer's diagnosis, a genuine sense of shame crossed her face. She apologized, acknowledging her lack of awareness during the divorce and expressing a desire to rebuild our relationship. Despite her remorse, she argued that her grandmother would want her to inherit, and it was unfair for me to withhold it. I countered, asserting that if our relationship hinged on monetary considerations, perhaps it was best not to have one at all. Although she professed a genuine desire for reconciliation, I couldn't bring myself to believe it at that moment. I informed her that while I would entertain the idea of rebuilding our relationship, the inheritance was off the table. In response, she looked at me with pure resentment and left my house without any attempt on my part to intervene. In the aftermath, I sought the perspectives of my friends. Most agreed that I made the right decision, but a close friend expressed a different viewpoint, suggesting that since money held little significance to me, I should have prioritized mending the relationship. I've been wrestling with the idea of letting my daughter have a portion of my inheritance just to have some semblance of family in my life. It's not a decision I'm comfortable with, but ever since someone suggested it, the thought has been lingering in my mind. Should I consider giving my daughter a share of my inheritance? Update 1. Hi everyone, the response to this post has been more overwhelming than I anticipated. Thank you all for your advice and insights. It's given me the perspective I needed. To address the most common question about what happened during the divorce, I haven't talked about it for years, but I suppose it's time. My wife and I were married for 23 years. You'd think that after such a long time, there wouldn't be betrayal, but unfortunately, that wasn't the case. Without delving into the painful details, I discovered she was cheating on me with multiple men for years. The revelation devastated me, leading to heavy drinking and a period of destructive behavior. Our confrontations during the separation were tumultuous, and her influence, especially as a local celebrity due to her journalism career, played a significant role in alienating my daughter. After nearly a year of living in this chaotic state, we faced each other and got divorced. My ex-wife's attempts to tarnish my reputation were almost successful, and it took considerable time for me to overcome the drinking and rebuild my life. As I've mentioned, my daughter's complete abandonment compounded the difficulty. Admittedly, I was not a present parent during this tumultuous period. The revelation of my ex-wife's affairs threw me off balance, and I distanced myself from my daughter. Despite attempts at reconciliation after getting my life back on track, she refused to listen, blocking me everywhere. Regarding my mother's inheritance, technically belonging to my father, it stemmed from my grandparents' property investments. When my father passed away at 21, everything went to my mother, and she retained ownership during my marriage and for some years post-divorce. My daughter was aware of her grandmother's property holdings, but I never touched that money, as income from my construction business sufficed for a comfortable life. As for my daughter, she hasn't reached out since that night, and honestly, I don't expect her to. It seems apparent that her involvement was centered around the inheritance, and now that it's off the table, our relationship might not continue. While I'm not entirely unaffected, I've learned not to expect too much from people, regardless of their connections. Thank you all for your support. I feel it's time for me to move forward and explore new possibilities, including re-entering the dating scene to find companionship instead of lingering on the ghosts from my past. Update 2. This week has been quite eventful. Coming back from work, contemplating an outing with friends, the doorbell unexpectedly rang, revealing my ex-wife. A sight that shook me to the core. She had undergone changes in appearance, making recognition take a moment. Despite the awkwardness, I invited her in when she expressed the need to talk. Small talk ensued, leading to her revelation that our daughter had informed her about the inheritance. This expectation didn't surprise me. She acknowledged the difficulty of the divorce on me and urged me not to punish our daughter. Paralleling my daughter's sentiments, she emphasized her youth during the divorce and the inevitability of her siding with her mother. Halting her, I clarified that any lingering hurt wasn't directed at our daughter, but rather at the realization that her sudden reconnection was motivated by the prospect of financial gain. Rebuffing any attempts at defense, I asserted my final decision and requested her departure. In the aftermath, I sat in disbelief, never expecting such an encounter. I later went out with friends to distract myself. Update 3. This afternoon, I received a call from my daughter, initially reluctant to pick up. However, curiosity prevailed. She expressed apologies, acknowledging she should have handled things differently. Surprisingly, she invited me to her wedding, emphasizing a desire for a renewed relationship. Conflicted, I'm unsure if this is genuine or an attempt to secure the inheritance. Seeking advice on how to navigate this situation. Update 4. After considering the advice from many, I've decided to attend the wedding as a guest, not part of the wedding party. Recognizing the significant leap from estrangement to walking her down the aisle, I hope this marks the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship. Grateful for the support and well wishes from all of you. Stay tuned for more updates.
I acquired a $50,000 house using the elderly man's funds, and Vivian proudly displayed her bank book, boasting about the purchase. Despite my attempts to maintain composure and avoid surprise, laughter overcame me. In response to her inquiry about my amusement, I continued laughing openly. The eldest son's wife seemingly aimed to leave me speechless, but instead of retorting, I chuckled unabashedly before regaining my composure. I looked at her and, with a touch of sympathy, uttered, "Sorry for you. My name is Rita, and since marrying my husband, who is a decade my senior, I've been a subject of gossip. He was already affluent, owning multiple companies and substantial wealth. Marrying a significantly older man, especially one with such financial standing, led people to assume I was after his money. However, I genuinely never coveted his wealth. In reality, my husband grew up in poverty after his father's disappearance due to gambling. Living in the same apartment complex where I was the landlord's daughter, we became childhood companions. As a child, I confessed my feelings to him, only to be rejected with laughter and a promise to reconsider when I was older. Even when he moved to New York, we continued corresponding. Despite my repeated confessions, he maintained the stance that I was too young. Our communication persisted even through high school, where he expressed surprise at my continued affection. Upon graduating high school and starting university, I confessed once more, receiving a response that he'd consider my confession once I broadened my perspectives in university. Throughout my 4 university years, my feelings for him remained unwavering. Upon graduation, I confessed again, and this time, he bashfully acknowledged my consistent love. At 23, I began working while he, at 33, garnered attention for his thriving business ventures in New York. Eager to marry, he promised to do so once his company achieved success. Living together at the time, I diligently attended to household chores and prepared his favorite meals, awaiting his return. There were moments of doubt about his feelings, but when questioned, He admitted to initially considering my affection a childhood crush. Surprised by my persistent confessions in high school and college, he began to feel shy and self-aware of his feelings. Despite concerns during my college years that I might find someone else, he assured me he had no time for romance due to intense focus on studying and overcoming his impoverished background. Both of us remained confident that we would never betray each other. We always had a harmonious relationship, even amidst the news of various couples in our circle going through divorces. The concept of divorce seemed distant and irrelevant to us. With my husband amassing a $12 million fortune, some people, aware of our 10-year age gap, assumed I married him for his wealth or speculated about insurance benefits upon his demise. While some understood our long history together since my infancy and didn't jump to such conclusions, there were those who stubbornly clung to misguided beliefs. Despite the occasional gossip during social gatherings, where people assumed my husband had never experienced poverty and unfairly judged us based on societal assumptions about privilege, I remained unfazed. Whenever I noticed disapproving looks from my husband, I'd simply advise him to smile and brush off the rumors. Our love stood steadfast, unaffected by external opinions. My husband had complete trust in me, choosing to believe in our bond regardless of the skepticism around us. Several years into our marriage, we welcomed our eldest son, Peter, followed by the arrival of our second son, Dan, the following year. As a family of 4, we enjoyed financial comfort, yet my husband and I decided not to disclose our wealth to Peter and Dan. Instead, we taught them the value of money from a young age. In elementary school, they earned 10 cents for assisting with household chores, received a monthly allowance of $1, and managed their finances through piggy banks and account books. Despite our financial stability, we instilled in them the unpredictability of the world and the importance of financial responsibility. Both Peter and Dan, influenced by our approach, learned to respect each other's interests. By the time they reached high school, instead of asking for pocket money, they expressed a desire to work for what they wanted. Peter took a job at a cafe, while Dan found employment at a bookstore. My husband and I eagerly anticipated their futures, sharing in the excitement of discovering the kind of people they would eventually choose as life partners. When I mentioned the possibility of them choosing same-gender partners or opting for a single life, my husband laughed, agreeing that their happiness was paramount. We shared a heartfelt laugh, acknowledging our simple wish for our son's happiness, not anticipating the surprise that awaited us when our eldest son expressed his intention to marry someone that left us exclaiming, "You're marrying her? I want to introduce you to the woman I've been dating, Dad, Mom and Dan. I'm considering marrying her in the future." Even after Peter and Dan graduated from university, started working, and moved out of the family home, we made it a point to have a family dinner once a month. During one of these dinners, Peter announced his decision, and both Rita, my husband, and Dan were already in a celebratory mood, expressing excitement about meeting her. That evening, Peter brought the woman in question to our house. Upon entering, she marveled at our home, expressing aspirations of living in such a fantastic house someday. She exclaimed how wonderful it was, and Peter watched her with a fond smile. When we greeted them, she introduced herself as Vivian, mentioning that she works as a model, although she uses a stage name. Curious, she asked if we knew her, and I admitted that I occasionally glance at magazines but don't pay much attention to the models. She nodded in understanding, suggesting that I might be too old to be familiar with the magazines she appears in. I was taken aback when she added that I might not read the kind of magazines she features in, given my age. Despite the initial shock, I realized she probably didn't mean any harm and was merely making a casual observation. She then asked if my marriage was arranged, to which I replied no, explaining that Peter and I had a love marriage. Vivian, in turn, shared that she and Peter also had a love marriage. Surprisingly, she questioned the longevity of our relationship, considering the 10-year age gap. Sensing a comparison between the lengths of our romances, I pointed out the futility of such comparisons and emphasized that we had a love marriage, just like she and Peter. However, she seemed skeptical and brought up the topic of money, insinuating that we might be pretending for financial reasons. Peter intervened, asserting that our parents had a genuine love marriage, evident in the way they are together. This seemed to halt Vivian's line of questioning. When Peter took Vivian home, my husband and Dan were shocked by her remarks, leaving them too stunned to say anything. In the aftermath, my brother's choice of a potential life partner left them appalled and questioning if he would really marry someone with such an attitude. He's a high earner. There must be plenty of other nice women out there. Dan, visibly concerned about his brother, was holding his head. I patted his shoulder, offering reassurance. It's okay, Dan. Peter wasn't endorsing her behavior, was he? He wasn't overlooking her remarks. He must have plans to handle her if they get married. He must genuinely love her to choose her over all the other nice women out there. Despite the complexity of their expressions, my husband and Dan seemed to agree with my words. Our family decided to celebrate the marriage of Peter and Vivian. However, even after the marriage was decided, Vivian made a demand. Since you're the groom's family, you should give a gift of $10,000 per person. Peter silenced her, stating that the standard amount was sufficient. He explained, if we receive that much, it'll look like I'm not earning anything, which calmed down and agitated Vivian simultaneously. As long as Peter kept a firm hand on her, we hoped they could build a good home. My husband Dan and I decided not to worry about their household. Time passed and my husband eventually passed away due to illness and aging. By that time, those who had once thought I married him for his wealth had come to see me as a devoted wife. At the funeral, no one looked at me suspiciously. However, one person's eyes were shining with excitement. Vivian, Peter's wife. She didn't say anything at the funeral, but soon after, she came to our house flaunting a bank book. I've always been stopped by Peter, but this time he agreed with my plan, so it's the end for you now. Confused by her words, I burst into laughter upon seeing the bank book. With that bank book, I bought a house for $500,000 with the old man's money. Watching Vivian proudly show off the bank book, I couldn't help but burst into laughter, realizing the huge mistake she had made based on her words and the bank book in her hand. Despite my efforts to keep calm and not be surprised since my husband's death, I couldn't contain my laughter. When Vivian asked why I was lacking so much, expecting defeat, I just laughed in front of her. After finally stopping my laughter, I looked at her and said, "Sorry for you, huh?" She didn't seem to understand, so I pointed at the bank book in her hand. Look at the name carefully. Confused, she realized it was Peter's bank book. Bursting into laughter again, I couldn't help but find humor in the mix-up. I clarified, the first character of Peter's name and my husband Paul's name are the same, right? As I laughed, Vivian, embarrassed, pleaded not to be laughed at. She had mistakenly thought it was her father-in-law's bank book and even borrowed his ID from a black bag at the funeral. However, it turned out the bag belonged to her own husband, Peter. Despite the mix-up, I managed to buy a house for $500,000 with it. When Vivian questioned if I had $500,000 to borrow a house, I responded, well, Peter was with me, so I had him do it. I found the situation increasingly hilarious. Vivian discovered a bank book in her husband Peter's bag, and it seemed she suggested buying a house with the account holder, Peter. Judging by the amount in the bank book, she proposed buying a $500,000 house. Since Peter and Vivian were living in an apartment, Peter might have thought it was time to invest in a house. For Peter, it was merely buying a house with his earned money, but Vivian mistakenly thought it was my husband's bank book and believed she could use it. Not being the account holder, I thought it might be the bank book with my husband's insurance money. The beneficiary of my husband's insurance was me, and normally you can't use the account of someone who has passed away, right? Vivian's face turned red at my words. Then Peter and Vivian's parents appeared at our house. I thought you'd be here, Peter said nonchalantly as Vivian's parents, looking pale, came to me, bowing repeatedly. They apologized for their daughter's rudeness. As I was surprised, Vivian's parents explained what had happened. After Peter and Vivian decided to buy a house and completed the contract, an excited Vivian texted her mother, saying, "Got a mansion with the dead father-in-law's insurance money. I'll invite you over once we move in." Now I'm going to brag to the money-hungry mother-in-law about buying a house with the money she was supposed to get. In a panic, her mother showed the message to her father, and they both contacted Peter in a hurry. Peter calmed them down, saying, I see, and brought them to our house. I always kept an eye on Vivian, expecting her to mess up sometimes, but I never thought she'd mix up my bank book with Dad's. I didn't think she'd make such a blunder. Peter laughed as much as I did when he realized Vivian's mistake. Vivian's parents told her to apologize, their faces still pale. But Peter and I continued to laugh, creating a chaotic scene. Once we stopped laughing, Vivian's parents apologized and said, "We're truly sorry for what our daughter did." Seeing her parents flustered, Vivian also apologized to us. "Oh, it's all right. In the end, I haven't suffered any harm," I told Vivian and her parents, but they insisted on apologizing. "We know you two had a love marriage and were together before your husband built his fortune. We saw your husband on a TV program talking about how you two met. My wife and I were so moved by your love story," Vivian's parents explained. I exclaimed in surprise as I didn't know anything about it. Peter, sitting next to me, said, "Ah, I thought Mom didn't know." Dad couldn't stand seeing Mom misunderstood, so he talked about it everywhere, and it reached the ears of a TV station. They thought it was a great story and broadcasted how Mom and Dad met. Was that what he was asking about a few years ago when he wanted to tell people our story? "Ah, I guess you did give the okay. I thought it was just for casual conversation." As my face turned as red as Vivian's, who was still embarrassed by her blunder, I realized the legacy my husband had left behind. Our daughter had caused such a disgrace. "If Peter wants to divorce her after this," Peter, looking puzzled, replied, "What? I have no intention of divorcing her even after what she did. Like Mom said, there was no harm done, and I would have stopped her if it looked like there would be. I married her, including her occasional blunders, because I love her. I'll take responsibility for her actions, so please don't worry." Peter said this with a refreshing smile. Vivian hugged him, and her parents were in awe, praising Peter for his kindness. When Dan, the younger son, heard about it later, he said, "I just can't understand my brother's thinking," looking skyward. When I asked Peter why he loved her so much, he said, laughing, "She's never boring to watch." Remembering how he made me laugh during my grief after my husband's death, I felt I understood what he meant. Being with her probably meant no time for minor worries or sulking. Though Vivian did what she did, she's been without an allowance for a while and recently started working at my favorite cafe. Whether she was embarrassed by how much I laughed at her, scolded by her parents, or heard in detail about mine and my husband's love story from them, I'm not sure. But lately she's been calling me ma'am and treating me more respectfully. For a while, I think I'll continue visiting this cafe, watching Peter's wife grow and change.
The air conditioner's gentle hum in my workspace stood out sharply from the whirlwind of ideas racing through my head. I'm a lawyer named Anna, and I'm 28 years old. It's a far way from the chaos of my early years, a past I even kept hidden from my closest friends and family. The calmness of the ringing shattered my office. On my phone, the screen revealed an indeterminate quantity, but something about it felt unsettlingly similar to a cautious hand. I spoke in response. I spoke up. "Speak with a combination of expertise and Anna. Be careful. Your father has arrived." There was an anxiousness in the voice that didn't do anything to stop my rising fear. A shiver went through me. More than 10 years have passed since my last heard that voice, a once meaningful voice, loving care, but has turned into a symbol of grief and betrayal. "Why are you contacting me?" I asked to speak for myself, severing with precision. During the quiet that ensued after his first things first, "I'm having problems. Anna, I need financial assistance from you." He mentioned, his voice breaking somewhat his request, even though it maybe started a fire of bitterness within of me. "My contribution now you," I shot back after all these years. Belief and rage coexisted in my tone. "To be sure, but if it weren't, I'm in a real pickle." Continuing Ed's deteriorating, desperate state. His voice, "You've long since ceased to be my father. You can't just phone me right now, and you may count on my assistance," I answered vocally. Chilly, and there was a steady pause on the line, a thick stillness that resembled an irreconcilable divide. "Anna, please, I'm still." Your father made a pathetic attempt to renewing an old friendship. Putting out the word "dad" felt strange, almost startling. "A father, you lost that title," I remarked when you chose her over me. The years of grief and resentment being incorporated into my speech. I believed you were mistaken, my daughter." I spoke up and stopped him. "Halfway through, you made your decision years." His voice was years ago, and now that I've made mine, a mixture of desperation and begging. "Hello, Anna. I'm sorry, but I need your help once." "I'm sorry" reverberated through my office like a hollow and pointless apologies don't alter historical events. I'm unable to assist you. Declared forcefully and disconnected my childhood before the age of 10. I was occupied with laughter and love are evidence of the I had a fantastic existence with my parents. Within our modest rental home, my mom ray of happiness and compassion lit our warm days, and our evenings with tales and dreams. My dad used to be silly, and an understanding man would play all night, playing games or giving me small lessons. The world's things our house was a happy cocoon where each day was an exploration, and each evening a lovely dream. But our comfortable existence came to an end. Sudden end following my mother's premature. The mansion that used to resound with death, love, and laughter became quiet. A portion of recollections, I strolled through the rooms. Every nook serves as a sharp reminder of it was an awful loss without her. Not only for myself, but also for my dad, who having lost his beloved life, yet the intensity of his sorrow appeared to decline swiftly. Much to my confusion and shock, in a matter of months later, he brought Marissa, a woman, home, who was going to play a big part in our life. I remember the moment he brought, a day that signified the conclusion of my treasured childhood. Anna, this is Marissa. She intends to remain with one evening. My father declared, his voice lacking the warmth that I saw. I looked up at her, accustomed to this, looking for a little maternal warmth, but discovered none in her. Her towering appearance, her icy stare, and starting at the very beginning, noticed a difference in the atmosphere, one that gave me an inexplicable feeling of fearful hello. Anna, Marissa called out. Silky but lacking in a genuine sense, the smile seemed to soothe rather than conceal a terrible element behind its reveal themselves. In the days that followed, the home seemed altered, as though the walls, they were pulling away from her presence. The happy recollections of the time appeared to slip away, giving way to a persistent discomfort that permeated every corner. I recall glancing at Marissa, searching for a redeeming thing or thoughtful of her, yet her appearance, the motion appeared to contain an unsaid hatred. It was evident that she wasn't keen to take up the space left by my mother. Nonetheless, to create a new story in which I was an awkward aspect of her that I observed. Stroll around our house, which used to felt content and safe. I was unable to assist, however, felt as though her coming was only the start of a particular thing. Unsettling, the way she gazed at me with eyes with a tendency to conceal more than they revealed was not encouraging for the future. The time after Marissa's arrivals resembled strolling via a nightmare from which I was unable to awaken. There was a time when my mother's love and laughter felt chilly now. Marissa's unwelcome presence created a shadow covering all that, transforming even the easiest daily schedules into a sequence of battles. While having breakfast one morning, my dinner seemed abnormally salty, I noted. Marissa, did you over-season it with salt? This, my voice inquired. Hesitant, did I? It has to be an error, Anna. Eat it, don't be so picky, she shot back, her voice disdainful. Nearly jesting, the occurrences increased in frequency. Additionally resentful, I recall discovering my clothes destroyed following a laundry. Marissa, all of my clothing is faded, the question I posed one day, displaying my old favorite outfit, now stained and unfit. She took a quick look at it, and, with a shrug casually, perhaps the washing machine is misbehaving, or maybe it's time you give up wearing such juvenile attire. Garments, a wave of annoyance swept through me, but further arguments would exacerbate the situation. Worse, I felt powerless and resorted to my father, expecting him to be able to look past her. Marissa, the fixad dad, is destroying my stuff. She mistreats me every time. One, I said. Evening, trembling with a combination of fury, and my dad's response was rather, compared to my expectations, Anna, you're thinking that Marissa is abusing her to assimilate into our family and cease causing problems. He stated sharply, his remarks cutting deep. But that's the reality, Dad. Protest attempt. But he refused to listen. Anna, that's enough. I'm not interested in to hear your allegations repeated. said, his voice erupting with rage at each day was difficult to traverse. Concerning Marissa's animosity and my dad's apathy toward the place that previously felt like home. I felt like a jail instead of a haven. I began to spend more time in my chamber, attempting to get away from the ongoing stress that was suspended in the air residing in that scary mansion. I felt isolated and misinterpreted the security and contentment that previously occupied those walls were in place of dread and worry daily. I yearned for the days gone by, for the occasions when my mom's grin was sufficient to illuminate the entire space. Striking contrast with the current gloom, lurked around every corner, coexisting alongside. Marissa turned into a daily struggle to avoid. Additionally, perseverance, her hatred for me grew from insults to physical attacks, torture. It began with a gentle pinch on my arm or a twist in my abdomen every time. In areas that are readily hidden beneath my garments, the hurt was brutal and intense. A prompting of my powerlessness in her presence, I devised plans to stay away from. She is aware of her location at all times. I used to drive vast distances inside the house to hold off till she is in another room. Before, despite my best efforts, I moved around. Sometimes, I was taken off guard by her. And those instances invariably led to experiencing any discomfort one day when I was reading in silence in the living room. When Marissa entered, there was no apparent reason to pinch my arm firmly using her nails. I winced in agony as it dug into my skin, but suppressed any cries of protest. She gave me a chilly glance, a victorious grin before moving away on one of Grandma's infrequent visits. She observed my circumspect moves and how I recoiled at the sound of Marissa's voice. Anna is resonating throughout the home. Grandma, everything is well at home? Questioned, a worried tone in her voice. I stared at her, wanting to tell her so badly, the truth to her, but fear and the need to. I restrained myself so as not to cause her anxiety. Yes, Grandma, I'm back. Everything is all right. I told her I had a lot of schoolwork, but I wasn't using a fake smile. She appeared uncertain, yet didn't push any harder. I experienced a touch of shame for tricking her. Yet I was unable to bear the idea of upsetting her in any way dismay that night when Grandmother departed. I noticed Marissa observing her through the glass. Expression of contentment it was as. If she had enjoyed knowing that she influenced me, I would have suffered harm, and succeeded in doing so. Her victorious expression strongly indicated she was the one in charge, and I was utterly defenseless. Participant in her twisted game, I felt like going back to my room, enmeshed in a vicious cycle of silence and cruelty. The actual discomfort caused by Marissa's pinches and turns were tolerable in contrast to the mental chaos. I thought of school as my haven, a place where I might momentarily forget the suffering of my domestic life. However, even there, the outlines of my problems at home started to come through. Mrs. Thompson, my instructor, is a good-hearted person. A woman who constantly gave her students encouragement. One day, I began to detect changes in myself. When I turned in my homework, she firmly gripped my wrist while focusing on my arm's bruises. What, Anna? Occurred here? These resemble bruises. She claimed that worry was in her voice. I swiftly retracted my arm, enveloping my sleeve is bruised. Nothing at all, Mrs. Thompson. I collapsed. I pretended to be lying while dodging her stare. Mrs. Thompson averted her gaze. Persuaded Anna, should there be any incorrect, or if someone is harming you, can inform me of the significance of speaking up. She asked her eyes to look for the reality that I desire to reveal to her, give her all the details regarding Marissa and how I was always afraid, yet the words failed to flow, so I pushed I'm all right. Mrs. Thompson honestly grinned. It was only a careless mishap. She presented me with a long, introspective glance, followed by a nod gradually. Okay, Anna, but keep in mind the door is never closed. You're not by yourself, remarked, smiling consolingly at me. I nodded as a knot started to grow in my throat. Her generosity added to it. challenging to keep up the facade that everything went smoothly, as I particular day, Mrs. Thompson's walk home. Phrases replayed in my head. I experienced a mixture of appreciation for her thoughtfulness and a sincere the feeling of isolation brought on by bearing my burdens by itself. The idea of disclosing the reality. At home, my existence was horrifying, and I worried about the outcomes. What Marissa would do if she became aware of it had mentioned. I was silent that evening, having supper with someone. Pondering Mrs. Thompson's words offered to assist Marissa when I became speechless. "Why is everyone quiet tonight? Anna Kitty received your tongue," she questioned mockingly. I just shook my head and carried on with my meal, attempting to minimize my size and imperceptible as possibilities while I lay in bed after supper. The truth of my circumstances felt more and more than ever formidable. Mrs. Thompson's concern had convinced me that individual's the problem, but the dread of what exposes the maybe the truth prevented me from speaking. I was between the desperate need to communicate someone and Marissa's fear of it takes balance to retaliate. I traversed daily the day my instructor, Mrs. Thompson, chose to include me in Father's Day was a day full of stress and fear for me. In the principal's office, I office twitching uncomfortably, my thoughts frantically worrying about how my father would respond if he ever made it to his stern face revealed a mixture of annoyance and humiliation. "What's up with Anna? Are you calling me to come to your school?" With a strong voice, he demanded this. He entered. My eyes slid to Mrs. Thompson. Looking for some reassurance, I swallowed hard and searched for my voice. Dad and Mrs. Thompson observed what she saw. "Bruises," I stumbled, sensing the burden of his stare before I could respond. Moreover, he suppressed his rage. "Tangible. What are you talking about, bruises? Once more, you are inventing stories." Mrs. Thompson intervened, speaking sternly, yet composed. "Mr. Smith, I'm worried about Anna's condition, and the bruises on her arm do not appear unintentional, which needs to be addressed." My father's expression darkened slightly with anger. "At home, she is pretty safe. Anna, are you misrepresenting our family?" Turning to face me, he looked disappointed. Let loose the tears I'd been holding in, began to leak. "Dad, it's not a lie. Marissa has been injuring me." I was able to exit the truth at last emerging. His response was one of complete "Marissa, it's unbelief that's absurd. She has only shown kindness. I will not allow you to accuse her in your eyes. Using these charges, but the facts are actual." Dad called out, pleading with him to accept it. With a start, he got up, his patient. "Tell Mrs. that you're wearing this too thin." "Thompson, all of that was made up." I dutifully faced the instructor and reiterated his. She nodded again without speaking. Anything while returning home empty-handed, said another way. He kept me trapped in my room. Using the door, I could perceive Marissa's voice brimming with deceptive worry. "I told you that she's only looking for." I sat on my bed, she added, paying attention, having a strong sense of loneliness and sorrow at the one person I believed I could guarantee that he had turned his. The walls of my room, which are facing me, had previously seemed to be my haven, but now I lay there feeling like I was inside a prison. There, reflecting on all that had occurred as a result of the physical abuse's suffering, was insignificant in contrast to the emotional, the agony of not being believed, and my father punished me. It was a severe understanding that the individual who was meant to adore and guard me unwaveringly was now the origin of my deepest agony in the days after my confinement. Among the darkest were those in my chamber. Had already felt imprisoned entirely and helpless. I realized that my only chance lay. On my mother's side, my granny was a compassionate and loving woman with always been kind to me, but I never thought to bother her with my problems one night at home while I was. My father and Marissa had their hands full. I plucked up the bravery to give I was shaking my hands, Grandma, as I dialed her phone number. "Hi," her reassuringly warm voice said. "Over the phone." "Anna here, Grandma," stated, attempting to maintain a steady tone. Anna, how are you, my love? She questioned her style. Tears filled with sincere concern welled up. When I answered, Grandma, I need in my eyes. I would like to remain with you for a. Although there was a brief period of stillness on what went wrong with Anna on the other end, I had an experience. Therefore, I took a deep breath, words flying out of my mouth. It's Marissa has harmed Mom and Dad. Won't accept me. I am still trying to figure out what to do. Her voice carried concern, which I could perceive as. She answered right away, of course, my love. You immediately approach. I will attend to. The day my grandmother arrived was this one. Even though she was little, her presence filled the space. She faced my dad with a strength that took me by surprise. John, Anna isn't coming with me. Safe here, she proclaimed. With firmness, my father retreated and attempted to Mom. You can't just take her, I argue. She's your daughter, mine, and you unable to defend, she retorted. Acerbic, I refused to observe her. Marissa attempted to step in, but she's merely a kid inventing tales. You are unable to have faith in her instead of us. Grandma looked at Marissa's gaze. Steely, I can tell when a child is afraid. I'm bringing one, Anna, and if you attempt to halt me, I'll take this issue up with the officials. My father became aware that he was beaten and gave up trying to fight back. Opposition when I grabbed my belongings, I noticed. Marissa went from having a stubborn expression to overcoming. Stepping outside the home with my grandmother, I had a release of weight. Shoulders. I felt safe for the first time in months. It was a calm drive to Grandma's house, although her existence was consoling. When we got there, she turned to me and told me, Anna, you're secure now. I'm no longer concerned about my grandmother's home. I experienced the affection and protection that had been absent from my life serve as a haven for my healing, and used the contrast to regain my strength. Between her nourishing house and my father's home was glaringly cold. First time in a very long time. Sensed that my breathing had returned. Escaped the worry and fear that had troubled me. It had been years since I had gone. To reside at my father's house with my granny, the place she'd lived in sanctuary. A haven of love and healing. But time has moved on, and with it created a fresh wave of transformation in my cherished grandma departed, leaving a gap that seems impossible. At the funeral that Marissa and my father attended, their features, a mixture of fake sadness and ill-dressed zeal. It was apparent they were more interested in the potential benefits of rather than lamenting her death. Mourning following the funeral, as we assembled at Marissa, I wasted no time at my grandmother's house. Timing nicely, Anna, I assume you'll be finding a new place to live now. House and everything in it belongs to your father, now, she said in her voice, tinted with a barely concealed glee. My father nodded in accord, eyes surveying the room as if already planning what to do with the house. Couldn't help but smile, a reaction that seemed to confuse them. Actually, that's where you're wrong, I said, the confidence in my voice taking them by surprise. What do you mean, my father? Inquired, his visage turning to one of bewilderment. I took a long breath, enjoying the moment. Grandma left a will. She bequeathed the house and a considerable amount of money to me, I explained, observing as their expressions altered from bewilderment to startled. But you're just a child. I'm your father. I should be in charge of any the inheritance you receive. My father sputtered, his sense of entitlement evident. Marissa chimed in her voice, shrilly stating, until you come of age, your father will handle your property well. Prospects, their reactions were almost amusing. You don't care about me. So much that you didn't even wish me a happy day. I turned 18 a month ago. I'm legally an adult now, and I make my own decisions, I stated firmly, relishing the face of awareness to dawning on their fronts. My father's expression shifted from shock to rage, then to a sort of desperate pleading. Anna, you can't do. This is your family. I glanced at their memories of my childhood flooding back. You paused. Being my family a long time ago, I remarked. My voice is steady. Marissa stepped forward, her tone now imploring, at least let us stay in the house. We have nowhere else to go. We have not extended the lease of our residence. I shook my head. This is my house currently. You'll need to find somewhere else. As they left, the weight of years of pain and neglect appeared to lift my shoulders. I stood in the house that was as mine, a place loaded with memories of my grandmother's love, and felt a sense of closure. The echoes of the past, my father's call stirred remained. I sat there, phone in hand sensation, a tumult of feelings, wrath, betrayal, and a sense of injustice. But amid all that, there was also a sense of strength and a reminder of the resilience that had carried me through the depths of times.
I find solace in the understanding I share with my daughter-in-law. Following my husband's funeral, my mother-in-law, blissfully ignorant, bid me farewell with a radiant smile as she drove me away. However, the next day, panic painted her face when she visited my parents' house where I sought refuge. It was clear her scheme to secure my husband's inheritance had hit a snag. In that moment, the true gravity of ignorance struck me. My name is Emily. I'm 39, married to John, who is 2 years my junior. We have a daughter, Rose, in first grade. Living with my mother-in-law began a year ago after my father-in-law's passing. Concerned about her solitude in their spacious home, I agreed to the cohabitation. Initially, we split living expenses, offering some relief. Yet, unexpected challenges emerged as my mother-in-law started criticizing me for sharing household chores with my husband. She disapproved, asserting that it was unfit for the head of the family to engage in such tasks. Despite my role as the primary breadwinner due to a 2-year age gap with my husband, my mother-in-law remained oblivious to this fact. Frustrated, I pleaded with my husband to enlighten her about our financial dynamics, hoping to resume our shared responsibilities. However, he hesitated, revealing his reluctance to take on additional chores. Disappointed, I realized a new facet of my husband's character. Eventually, labeled a failure as a wife, I found myself shouldering all household duties alone, while my mother-in-law, a full-time housewife, remained oblivious to the imbalance. It's almost comical that she isn't fulfilling her role as a housewife, considering she should be sharing the household chores. With my husband now liberated from domestic duties, he started venturing out alone on his days off, donning casual attire despite claiming to be at work. Skepticism gnawed at me, questioning the authenticity of his purported work engagements. Moreover, on weekends, he began frequently checking his smartphone, leaving me curious about what captivated his attention. Despite my interest, he guarded his phone closely, leaving no opportunity for me to investigate. His supposed overtime hours were also inconsistent. He often returned home around the usual time or just an hour later. While suspicions of infidelity lingered, observing his routine on weekdays made me question the validity of such thoughts. A few months later, anomalies in my husband's behavior became more apparent. He had been consistent in contributing his share of living expenses, but now, instead of the customary $670, he was depositing only $600 or sometimes even $540. Perplexed, I confronted him about the financial shortfall, emphasizing my strict principles regarding money matters. With many years of marriage behind us, I expected a straightforward explanation. He nonchalantly attributed it to the company's poor performance, claiming a temporary reduction in his salary, making it challenging to meet the usual contribution. Doubtful, I pressed further, questioning whether financial cutbacks were a guise for unfaithfulness. Surprised, he vehemently denied any such betrayal, citing the presence of our family as a deterrent. While his response seemed sincere, the mystery of his weekend escapades lingered. Frustrated by the lack of clarity, I contemplated hiring a detective agency to unveil the truth. However, before I could take that step, a significant event unfolded a few days later during his work. A call from an unfamiliar number shattered the tranquility of my day. It turned out to be my husband's boss. The voice on the other end, the embodiment of concern, disclosed a distressing truth. John, my husband, had been in a traffic accident during a business errand and his life hung in the balance. The gravity of those words plunged my mind into chaos. The notion of danger to his life left me momentarily paralyzed, but soon reality snapped back. I promptly informed my boss, set aside any ongoing tasks, and rushed to the hospital, fervently wishing for his survival. Upon reaching the hospital, the devastating news awaited me. My husband had succumbed to the impact of a car collision while waiting for a green light at an intersection. Attempting to evade another vehicle that ran a red light, he stood no chance against the force of the collision. His instant demise left me grappling with an overwhelming torrent of responsibilities. Last year, I had experienced the rituals of wake and funeral preparations with the passing of my father-in-law. But then, I had my husband by my side. Now, I faced the daunting task alone. My grief-stricken mother-in-law, lost in a daze, proved incapable of offering assistance. She occasionally wandered away, seemingly seeking solace in places steeped in memories of my husband. The shock of losing both husband and son in rapid succession left her incapacitated. In the face of this tragedy, I resolved to be strong. I had to not only navigate the funeral arrangements but also prepare my daughter Rose for a future without her father. Breaking the news to Rose was an agonizing task. I explained that her father had been involved in a fatal car accident, leaving only the two of us to face the world together. Despite the uncertainty of her understanding, I felt compelled to share this harsh reality with her. As we progressed through the wake, the day of the funeral arrived, ushering in a new wave of emotions. The tension mounted, and I found myself unable to contain the flood of tears. My mother-in-law, seemingly concerned about my emotional state, approached me and uttered something utterly unbelievable. In the midst of my mourning, she callously suggested that since there was no blood relation, I should refrain from claiming John's inheritance and simply depart, leaving Rose behind. She even went so far as to question Rose's worth as my daughter, proposing that I take her when I leave. Her laughter accompanying these heartless words added an extra layer of shock. Struggling to comprehend such cruelty amid my grief, I decided to maintain composure until the funeral concluded and distance myself from my mother-in-law's callous remarks. Her smirking face lingered in my memory, fueling a desire for some form of retribution. Post-funeral, I meticulously prepared to depart, packing only the essentials for Rose and me. I approached my mother-in-law and declared my renouncement of any claim to John's inheritance, offering it to her without hesitation. Her face lit up with joy at the prospect, expressing relief and gratitude for my supposed understanding. She eagerly agreed, seemingly content with the arrangement, and happily retreated to her room, signaling the end of our association. As we left the house, I couldn't fathom the newfound happiness she exuded. Despite our initial decision to live together due to her loneliness, she now appeared content with our departure. The reasons for her joy remained elusive to me. Upon reaching my parents' house, I recounted the entire ordeal to my father, who was understandably outraged. He condemned my mother-in-law's actions, deeming her concern for inheritance immediately after John's death despicable. Concerned about our financial stability without the inheritance, my father pondered our future. However, I assured him that we would manage without it, having handled expenses on my salary alone for the past month or two. Expressing his concern for Rose's future and the importance of saving, my father generously offered us a place to live. Grateful, I accepted his kindness. Regarding my husband's inheritance, I revealed a document to my father that had recently arrived from my in-laws' house. A report titled John's Conduct Investigation. It contained shocking revelations about my husband's true nature. As I spent time at my parents' house on John's bereavement leave, contemplating our next steps, the doorbell incessantly rang. Irritated by the persistent ringing, I opened the door to find my mother-in-law looking pale and agitated. Confused by her sudden change in demeanor, I responded through the intercom, urging her to stop shouting. Her outburst about my knowledge of John's substantial debt disturbed the neighbors. Reluctantly, she acquiesced to a quieter conversation, but her unexpected visit begged the question. What did she want after proclaiming just the day before that we should no longer be in contact? I responded with cold detachment, stating that it concerned John's inheritance and suggested continuing the conversation inside. However, my mother intervened, adamantly refusing entry to someone who had callously told my grieving daughter to leave during a funeral. Concerned about shielding Rose from the discussion, I concurred with my mother's decision. Unyielding, my mother-in-law insisted on finding an alternative, leading us to agree to talk at a nearby cafe. Once at the restaurant, my mother-in-law wasted no time delving into the discussion. She accused me of leaving the house easily because I knew John was drowning in debt. I confirmed her suspicion, citing John's weekend work claims, perpetual smartphone proximity, and his sudden halt in contributing to living expenses as red flags. To clarify, I hired a detective agency that revealed his gambling addiction and mounting debts, information I learned just 2 days prior. Addressing her concern about my tears at the funeral, I admitted genuine sorrow for the loss but acknowledged that, considering everything, leaving was the right decision. Intrigued, she questioned the total amount of John's debt. Startled, I revealed a demand letter I received that day, a staggering $6,700, contributing to a grand total of $33,700 in debt. I warned her that unless she renounced the inheritance, she'd be burdened with the entire sum. Dismayed by the revelation, my mother-in-law stuttered, confessing that the inheritance from her husband was already spent, $13,500 on luxury items, anticipating John's inheritance. This expenditure explained her post-funeral shopping sprees. Realizing her financial recklessness, I acknowledged my inability to assist with her debt and urged her to handle the renunciation herself. I left, and in subsequent events, she managed to renounce John's negative inheritance, but the $13,500 debt remained. Attempts to seek help from relatives failed due to the rumors of her actions on the day of the funeral. In contrast, life for Rose and me took a positive turn. Despite Rose transferring schools, she embraced her new environment energetically. Living with my parents allowed me to focus on work, providing a stable income. We now spend quality weekends together, exploring shopping malls, visiting theme parks, and enjoying activities we couldn't during John's lifetime. Supported by my loving parents, our days are filled with smiles, and I am determined to sustain this newfound happiness.
Oh, I had assumed that Mom had a ton of. I told you I had money saved up, didn't I? Her out by now. What's the use of allowing the unemployed parasite to remain here? Since moving here 3 months ago, my savings were washed out by my son and his spouse. I was done with them treating me like a mate. With everything, so I quickly and silently went. I was phoned by my son. Mom, what's up? Tony seemed desperate when he spoke on the phone. Then something I had done had turned into headlines from around the country. My name is Sarah, and I'm 70 years old. Been residing in France for a while. However, things got worse with my heel, so I returned to my native United States. Unit was vacant, so I contacted to see if I might help my son and his wife remain with them temporarily. Tony, my only 44-year-old lone son, works in an office. Employee, neither he nor his spouse Alice do have children, and they appear to depart silently. While I was away, we lost contact, but I opted to get back in touch, and Tony appeared to happy to hear from me. I have described my situation and requested permission to remain for. Tony hesitantly admitted after a while that it was uncomfortable to force upon them, yet the joint. Seeing my family again brought me more joy than my hesitations, laced with a hint of anxiety. And joy, I rode in a taxi from the airport to their residence upon my arrival. Alice and Tony welcomed me to the Tony appeared content as Alice made her arrival. Was clearly upset, and I intend to stay here. For some months, my possessions will be delivered later. With my carry-on luggage, I headed to the living room. We spoke about our everyday lives and employment in addition to my most recent French life. Tony inquired as to why I had relocated to. I mentioned earlier that I'm getting older in France. Wish to take in the French countryside scenery. Tony chuckled, but Alice didn't change. Then we spoke about my health problems. Experiencing extreme lightheadedness, and was the minor's illness can be the cause of a seizure happens. Folks might not be able to stand as a result of the surroundings being spinning and possibly experiencing nausea. Felt uneasy being by myself, thus I desired to remain with them till my circumstances stabilizes. Following a discussion I had returned to the entryway to retrieve my items from my carry-on. While I was arranging my belongings in the hallway, overheard Alice and Tony talking. Are you really going to let Sarah go, Tony? Staying puts me against living with an elderly. Come on, woman, you are too, she's my mom. Part-time, so you won't necessarily certainly be present, but what about our days? I want to know how long she plans to stay off. Her gone, don't speak that way, mother will. When you finally depart, we can talk about money. Just keep it quiet tomorrow. She might hear you, but she's too elderly to listen to us. Bring keen ears to detect slights. And their IES dropped out of the discussion in, I apologize for imposing in the chilly hallway. Tommy and his spouse, so all of a sudden I'm. Yes, it's a major hassle for them. However, you should know that I'm pretty content right now. Chatting with Tony and his spouse. Following the years spent apart, when Tony was small, I was a single mother raising him. Following the death of my husband, Tony experienced his fair share of hardships. Coping with disease and everything isn't making up for it. But I was hoping to attend here to express my thanks and regrets. I came to this residence for that reason. It's a regret they're not welcome, but they have to live their own lives. Therefore, I visited that I tried to relax into the guest room they gave me. Next morning, Tony departed from my troubled heart. For work, and Alice and I were alone. As I was working on some crafts on the sofa, Alice was in the living room in front of me. Hey Sarah, please stop creating such a mess. Glancing around, I saw remnants of cloth and haphazardly placed threads. I'm sorry. Do you know what this is that I cleaned it up? I showed her the little bag I was making. On it, I had a small green turtle design. This is a turtle-themed purse. I adore turtles. I create small crabs with a turtle motif. Even features a zipper on its exterior. That's good, but Sarah, just relax. During the day, Alice interrupted me. Clearly bored inside, looking very much at. When I'm off, at least go somewhere else. You're obstructing me from my part-time work. But if I go outside too, I get lightheaded. Much, I'll take you to the adjacent community center to remain there throughout the day, and I had household responsibilities. Without allowing for further discussion, Alice stated, he kept on helping out with the responsibilities. You'll not be reading while you're here. The least you can do given that we're permitting you to stay, do some instead of crafts. Laundry and cleaning eventually astounded me. Murmured, all right, and then gently stood up. From then on, I completed all day. Even though I was woozy and hurt, I took on the housework. Tony and Alice handled me. Alice appeared more like a housekeeper. Addicted to social media all the time. It appeared from her phone that she hadn't been completing the housework before I. Did you bring your mother with you that night? Upon Tony's arrival at home, his banking card spoke to me with a smile that I don't. Although you live with us, living is expensive. Could you add something? I glanced over at Tony. I nodded at my reading glasses and got up. Took my handmade banking card out. Pouch and gave it to Tony, who he examined. Quickly, his expression stiffened as he waited. Mom, have you saved anything else but this? Accounts are all I have. They are unnecessary. A great deal at my age, no chronic diseases, or whatever I stated while grinning as the talk went on, and Tony's expression. This is not enough money, darkish man. Not even 10,000, as you claim to be alive. Huge overseas. So I thought Tony maintained asking persistently whether I had any more money, so I said no, and he sighed. Shrugged his shoulders. Okay, I'll wait. For the time being, I'm giving you a kindly allow you to reside here, since this is the very least that you could do. Following my bank account password was taken by Tony, and debit cards departing from the space that as I lay in bed at night, I could hear Tony tooting through the dividing wall. Our rooms, what a disappointment. Completely believed that Mom was wealthy. Actually, the household is losing money. I should not have allowed her to stay and see me. Told you to get rid of her already. Unemployed moocher does not benefit us. Regardless of how the two of them seemed, sure, I couldn't hear people speaking openly in the adjacent room, or perhaps they desired me. I was listening to them in my chilly bed, keeping back lonely tears and sadness the following day due to Alice's day off. She took me to the neighborhood center. I unzipped my duffel bag to keep up my maintenance in the living room, but discovered I was no longer in the necessary cloth at home, so I was hesitant, but I was unable to beg Alice to return and retrieve. Thankfully, my discomfort was under control today. I was familiar with this region, so I opted to stroll home in order to obtain when the fabric did arrive. I looked via the veranda into Alice's home, and an unknown male were present at. I initially believed him to be a guest, but they appeared very close, so I hesitated. Ate outside for a little before returning without going into the residence, which is why they want my departure, so that I wouldn't reopen the affair. While in the community center, my thoughts kept concerning Alice and those men and chose to call someone for guidance going forward. Refrained from discussing the men and kept communicating with Tony and his wife. But every time I went out of the house residence, I would boldly display a crimson turtle pouch on the brink of existence, room side table after 3 months, ever since I moved in with Tony's. By now, my family had become the homes built during my time there. I had a ton of things to perform at home, and when Alice was at home, so I was put in the community center. The majority of my savings had tired of Tony, a man with age addicted to gambling and spent the most of his spare time to play the lotto, and slots seemed to be his obsession with money. Originated from the financial difficulties he's suffering as a child. I first made an attempt to act, but ultimately obtained. Bringing it up always made him 3 months later, I was at my breaking point. Before a lengthy weekend one evening, I chose to bring a piece of equipment I had been taking Tony Alice into consideration. I appreciate that you, Tony, please let me stay with you. I know I made your life difficult when you were. Sorry, I was young and didn't have much money. For all the hassle I've brought about, but I'm with gratitude. I took out a handmade turtle bag from the table. It had a green color and this shell zipper serves as a reminder of, I hope you will both feel my thanks. You'll like to take it in defiance of neither Alice nor Tony had any expectations, expressed any curiosity about my artisanal pouch. Mom, have we really reached our limit? Consider the French account when you have money. I informed you, Tony, that we are out of luck. I put a lot of effort into this. Please accept it as a symbol of my love. Keep in mind how joyful you were when you were little. I used to feel the shell with some chocolates and small cash. Tony begins to become more displeased. I'm not a child anymore. Pleased to get such a thing. Sarah, for how long are you planning to stay? To genuinely swindle us. It annoys us. Tony and his spouse cast me in a chilly light. I frantically begged Tony, do you remember? Joe was the one who helped us in that old. We resided in an apartment that I don't recall to quit bringing up the past. Are we done being silently stunned? I tightened my grip on the turtle pouch and examined the papers feel inside the tomorrow. Tony and his spouse embark on a holiday leaving me behind, as I had anticipated, leaving the house following yesterday's talk, so I hurriedly packed my luggage with the designated courier and dispatched them, going for my French home. I also do not forget to insert the red turtle pouch. My carry-on bag. I jot down a brief note that thank you and depart from the table, the residence where I had spent 3 months later. I never went back home. Instead, I remained in the United States hotel for a little since I had tasks to complete, and Tony and his spouse seemed to get in touch with me, Eventually, true enough, after roughly 2 weeks, Tony calls Mom later. Let's head to the turtle pouch. Isn't that yours? Tony yells into the phone, hearing his words. You saw that I wasn't shocked when I observed the turtle incident on the news. Bag that I intended to present to Tony and his wife found a $1 check inside. Million was my method of expressing gratitude for all of their actions and to express regret for all the mischief I made when I was younger. Some may consider it superficial to a ton with cash, but I had imagined the day I may gift it to them after modestly storing enough. I did some excavating a little over 40 years ago, prior to finally running into Tony and discovered that he owed money. Attempted to settle bills from gambling with additional gaming only to find himself descending further. He had a reliable employment. I just desired that he pay off his debts, and they were unwilling to go in peace, though. Acknowledge my gesture fully, forgotten about their generosity shown to me and my family. Thus I made the decision to split $1 million in checks, modest amounts, and made charitable donations and welfare associations worldwide. America, where I put the gifts, created a turtle bag by hand and delivered it. The turtle pouch became an anonymous sensation, trending and generating headlines. A social media user named Alice. That's the turtle pouch, mommy, mate, right? That implies you intended to give us one. Rich as well, yep, just that was my means of expressing gratitude to you, and I apologize for creating both the pocket and putting the cash aside to donate to. You could have, in fact, claimed that we would have accepted if you had not wanted to. If you don't need my money, then my sentiments. Tony was either shouting into the phone, utterly insane, how much is that? Would you dare trick me and return it? Became inattentive and removed the phone away from my ear in a little amount of time, said, all right, relax, you're offering. There's another turtle, and I have a headache. And it's yours if you truly desire it. Tony at last calmed down and restated his craving for the turtle that we decided to meet in a cafe afterwards on the day I went. The final red turtle within a package to Tony and his spouse met where we'd already present and made a money demand prior to my actually sitting down when Tony silently removed the red turtle. Grabbed it right away, unzipping. It's not a check, but rather a little shell. Electrical gadget. What the devil is this? Tony tinkled with the unclear gadget. He discovered a small button, and when Ellie pressed it, a voice started to play. Standing beside Tony right away, Alter Hugh, seated close to Tony Alice's face, altered upon hearing a speech recording. It was Alice's voice, cordially speaking with something about another man who wasn't Tony. This explains why Alice's situation appeared to ultimately understand that it was a video showing her having an affair at. She attempted to steal the recorder at home from Tony's palm, although Tony clung to it. As they struggled, unlocked it. I brought an envelope and spread it out numerous photographs of Alice on the table. Cheating at home on another man provided with unquestionable proof. Alice became agitated and asked Ming why. Why did Tony pick up each picture individually? Analyzing them carefully ever since I arrived at things felt strange about your home. A buddy suggested that I hire a detective to find out and even made the offer to pay for them. What's the issue, and why would you do it? It's sad that you are my son's wife. To believe relatives are lying to one another. When you're older, you'll comprehend. I suppose fate brought me here to learn. Alice, have you been unfaithful to me? I've been with you ever since Tony got your personal secrets. If you're placing the blame for cheating on her, you should fuck off. What about the fact that I have never cheated? Tony, your debt fell silent, and it's now. When it was Alice's turn to talk, how about you? Throwing away all of your cash on gambling. Just make use of the funds you and I have. Your part-time work, thus you ought to. Some cash while taking in their squabble. This pair had managed to get their eyesight, to maintain its unity up until this point. Neither of Tony. Do you have any money? You have $40,000. Dead Alice, you've dedicated all of your profits to your partner in affairs that I had. The investigator also looks into your financial situation. Tony and Alice were both taken aback, and they started yelling at one another, and I was stunned when I initially heard the inquiry findings show that this pair was on the verge of bankruptcy. But we can make it. Return the money if we get Mum's funds. Now give it to us. I've given all that's left is this red money. Turtle statue, which he destroyed in my recall what happened to savings and gambling. You're not serious about all that in range. Tony sprang across the table at me. Other clients began to focus. And the employees rushed past the 1 million is mine. It was intended for me to give it back quickly. The cops needed to be summoned to hold Tony until the police spoke some common reason to him. They graciously took me back to my hotel because of my worries regarding Tony's combative conduct. 1 week later, Tony and Annalie, the partnership has declined. Repair as a result of their financial situation obtained. Tony, a divorced man, is now even more single. Engrossed in gaming AC more than he was discovered attempting to steal company funds. He was spared from prosecution, but was let go, which worsened his anger at the cafe. Was recorded on producing a video and sharing it on social media. He has trouble finding another work. Unable to take the disgrace, Tony disconnected every interaction and vanished following Alice's divorce, moved into an ancient house with no one to rely on, living alone in a public housing unit. Prior to my being able to donate to the turtle rescue is visible in my blog post. Ridiculing my own turtle became widely known. Alice began to experience intimidation and sexting. It ultimately extended to her part-time. Even the man she worked with and got her fired was involved in an affair and became weary of her and now departed without a paycheck. She is receiving temporary support for dependent. Following that, I went back to my family's. Once I'd finished unpacking, back home in France, I put on a dress in my apartment. The ease of practice while I was going over certain work pages where I heard a sound. The entrance appeared to be Joe, my roommate. Had arrived back home, Madame President. Hello again, and how was your journey? After a long absence, Joe arrived in America with grinning. He puts down his luggage and coat. Joe, who is 75 years old, lived in the same residential building where my son lives. Tony and I used to live together years ago. Was battling poverty after losing my spouse and taking care of a young Tony, asthmatic. We were without utilities and without anybody to ask for help. I was desperate and thought of giving up on everything. Joe and his spouse were upstairs. Our neighbors were the ones who saved us. Lifelines, give me a ring. I'm back, Sarah. And see, I brought a ton of, wow, all of my faith mementos, thank you. I'll bring a few to the storytelling gathering. Joe, see you tomorrow at the community center? Looked over each of the accumulated mementos. His happy expression on the table after we, having regained our footing, Joe and his, years after the wife moved away for employment. We encountered one another in the city, and I started assisting with a program of support for the poor, on whom Joe had established. Joe's wife had already died by then, so we began collaborating as a company life partners. I have been in charge of the structure after Joe left a few years ago. Years back, what was once a tiny Joe and M's venture has developed into an extensive international organization. In the last 30 years, we've been concentrating on assisting lone mods in racing a few years before moving to France. Passed to examine their advanced assistance systems, even though we gain a lot of recognition. In France, our reach is still limited. Acknowledged in America, I intend to grow our plans there shortly and desire to invest time in Tony's family as only a mother before they learned about my work. In the end, I was unable to obtain them to comprehend my feelings, but that's their decision, even if it was just temporary. I was content to act as if for a family even though I'm 70 years old today. Even at 70, I still have a lot of wants, and I have to strengthen my back in order to attire and started considering my worldwide speech in support of. Next day,
I selected him as the recipient of the chocolate cake because I knew he favoured it. You always choose chocolate cake, don't you? Mum warned, concerned about the caffeine content. Ignoring her advice, I swiftly exchanged my cake with Kevin's. After a brief hesitation, I took a bite of the caffeine-laden treat while my mom continued to enjoy her own cake. Kevin, proudly boasting about reserving this cake a month, in advance emphasised the delicious crushed nuts on top. Suddenly, his demeanour shifted as he began to choke. His face turned red and he struggled to breathe. Foam formed at his mouth and he shivered before collapsing to the floor. My name is Emma, a 36-year-old working at a food inspection company. I live with my husband, Kevin, who is 2 years older, and our 7-year-old daughter, Catherine. Our journey began at university, leading to marriage and the birth of Catherine. However, her slow development worried us. Despite consulting numerous doctors, no issues were found. Catherine's lack of progress caused a rift between Kevin and her. His mother, Kay, also deemed Catherine as having a disability, leading to her disapproval and avoidance. Only my father-in-law showed affection, considering Catherine unique and lovely. Before marriage, Kevin was kind, but his attitude changed with Catherine's challenges. His frequent bouts of anger, expressed through loud noises and table banging, stressed me to the point of health issues. Menstrual irregularities, eventually leading to menopause, prevented us from having more children. As Catherine entered school, her slow speech led to suggestions of a special needs class, an idea Kevin vehemently opposed. Despite my belief that it would be a better fit for her, I couldn't propose it due to Kevin and Kay's objections. Work offered solace from the home environment. When offered a full-time position, Kevin hesitated, insisting on my continued commitment to housework. Reluctantly, I agreed. However, Kevin's solution was to have his critical mother, Kay, take over household duties. After my father-in-law's sudden death, Kevin and Kay's behaviour at the funeral raised suspicions. Despite Catherine losing her only ally, Kevin spent more time at his parents' house. When I fell ill and asked for help, he refused, opting to stay away for a week. As my health improved, I received a job promotion, bringing both joy and the weight of added responsibilities in the midst of my challenging home life. I discussed the situation with Kevin, and as anticipated, he insisted that I should manage the household chores properly. To add insult to injury, he gave me a mocking look and questioned whether I could handle the title of a section chief, claiming it was equivalent to his position. Kevin abruptly left the table and headed to the bedroom. The next day, Kay visited our house and Kevin pointed out the supposed mess, attributing it to my lack of effort in housework. Kay hastily entered, meticulously inspecting everything from the cleanliness of the windows to the folding of the laundry and water stains in the bathroom. She made me redo everything, and Caffeine started engaging in conversation with Kay. Caffeine approached Kay with a serious expression, asking her about the 4 main elements of happiness and inquiring about happy hormones. Surprised by Catherine's rapid-fire questions, Kay appeared bewildered. Catherine continued her passionate explanation about neurotransmitters, leaving Kay increasingly perplexed. Eventually, overwhelmed by Catherine's focus, a worn-out Kay went home. On my birthday, Kevin, returning from a business trip, surprised me by buying a birthday cake. A first since our marriage, this unexpected act puzzled me, as Kevin had never bought anything for Catherine or me before. During dinner, he showered me with overly sweet words, apologising for leaving household chores to me and promising to help more. Well, Kevin's words made me uncomfortable. I didn't want to spoil the moment. After dinner, as I cleared the dishes, Kevin retrieved the cake from the fridge, insisting he would handle it. Although uneasy about his behaviour, I decided to call Catherine to join us. In Catherine's room, she warned me not to eat the cake, expressing urgency in her gaze. Trusting Catherine, I returned to the living room, where she insisted we eat without forks. I realised she had swapped my cake with Kevin's. As we ate, Kevin proudly discussed reserving the cake, and suddenly he began to choke. Kevin collapsed on the floor, showing signs of anaphylactic shock from a buckwheat allergy. Both Kevin and I were allergic to buckwheat, and it was confusing since we were eating cake that shouldn't contain any buckwheat. In a calm voice, Catherine instructed me to call an ambulance. Following her guidance, I hit Kevin's back to help him expel the cake. At the hospital, Kevin's life was saved, and I wondered how Catherine knew something life-threatening would happen. After completing the hospital admission procedures, I returned home. As soon as I arrived, Catherine showed me a candy wrapper she retrieved from the trash. It was a wrapper for cookies made with buckwheat flour, and Corrine explained that it was from the cake box Dad had bought. According to Seren, the seal on the box was half peeled off. And when she checked the kitchen trash, she found a kini wrapper she'd never seen before. Upon researching online, she discovered it contained buckwheat flour. She then reminded me of Catherine's warning mom. If you eat that, you'll die. The realization hit me hard. If not for caffeine's swift action, I could have been the one eating that potentially harmful cake. The thought of being the one on the hospital bed sent chills down my spine. As fear and suspicion crept in, I considered involving the police. However, caffeine's words made me reconsider. If Dad was the one who collapsed, informing the police might make me a prime suspect. A feeling of despair overcame me, and Caffeine assured me that she would handle it. She ventured into Kevin's study, defying his strict instructions, and began searching for evidence. To my surprise, Caffeine found a notebook in a drawer that detailed a shocking revelation. My father-in-law had been victimized in a similar manner. The notebook described the plan to mix crushed buckwheat flour cookies with sprinkles. Even more disturbingly, Kai was implicated in this terrifying scheme. They were conspiring together, and at the bottom of the page, it ominously read, "Next is Emma's birthday." My hands involuntarily tightened around the notebook, and Caffeine, noticing my anger, reassured me that everything would be okay. Catherine shook her head regretfully, explaining that the notebook might not be admissible as evidence. If Kevin and Kay claimed it was just fantasy, the case would likely be dismissed. The lack of concrete evidence made me feel helpless, and Caffeine, sensing my frustration, held my hand firmly, promising to find the evidence and protect me. Determined to seek justice, Catherine and I began preparing for the final showdown. Our plan was to lure Kay into our house under the pretense of learning how to cook Kevin's favourite dish. While Kay taught me in the kitchen, Caffeine discreetly searched her bag and found the buckwheat cookies. With one cookie in hand, we took it to my workplace for a composition test. Several days later, as Kevin was discharged from the hospital, I informed Kay that I was preparing a celebration for his recovery. I asked her to pick him up, and while waiting, Catherine and I prepared his favourite dishes, including the potentially tainted cookie. As Kevin and Kay returned, we welcomed them to the table, where the atmosphere quickly shifted. Kevin whispered something to Kay, and they both seemed puzzled. It appeared that our plan was beginning to unfold, and I steeled myself for the confrontation ahead. As she released the fried chicken she held with her chopsticks, she seemed oblivious to the fact that it slipped from her grasp. The tension in the room intensified as Kevin and Kay refrained from touching the food. Deliberately, I engaged Kevin in conversation, inquiring about the seasoning. "Oh, I guess I can't make it as good as your mother does," he mumbled, glancing down. I responded with my biggest smile, assuring him that the seasoning not only tasted good but also seemed to provide energy. Casually, I mentioned my father-in-law's recommendation of the seasoning, observing Kevin and Kay shivering as if they were cold. Catherine, undeterred, sprinkled the seasoning over their rice. In protest, Kevin swatted away Catherine's hand, expressing concern about adding something suspicious. Ignoring his objections, I continued smiling and serving the food. Catherine persisted, reaching for the seasoning, but Kevin, with a terrifying expression, shouted, "Enough! Why are you so scared?" "I just want you and your mum to live longer," I cheerfully retorted, flashing my brightest smile. The atmosphere grew tense as Catherine defied Kevin's warning and sprinkled the seasoning over their rice. The room was charged with Kevin's anger, as he shouted, "Stop putting something so suspicious into it." Unfazed, I continued with my smile, drawing attention to his past actions of sprinkling the same seasoning on my cake, leading to his hospitalisation. With a triumphant gesture, I presented documents obtained from our company's inspector, linking the substance on the cake to the buckwheat cookies. Kevin and Kay exchanged glances, denying any knowledge of the situation. However, I placed a copy of Kevin's incriminating notebook on the table, revealing details of the ordered cookies and their sinister plan. Red and then blue in the face, Kevin and Kay struggled to explain away the evidence. Kevin's notebook held damning information, including details of their plot and attempts to mask the crime. Staring sternly at Kay, I connected the dots, questioning them about their involvement in my father-in-law's death. Kevin finally admitted to his vengeful act, revealing his resentment towards my father-in-law's interference. Shocked and angry, I listened as he confessed to mixing the buckwheat cookies into the seasoning, targeting my father-in-law due to his disapproval of Kevin's relationship with his mother. Fueled by anger and disbelief, I declared their actions as a crime and threatened to report them to the police. In a desperate attempt to conceal evidence, Kevin snatched the copy of the notebook from the table, crumpled it, and possibly swallowed it. Caffeine, and I stared in surprise at his desperate act. Caffeine calmly revealed that it was just a copy, and the original was safely stored elsewhere. She placed a voice recorder on the table, exposing their crimes from the beginning. As the evidence mounted against them, Kevin collapsed into his chair, realizing the gravity of their actions. With the truth exposed, the police took Kevin and Kay away. Their cries and protests echoed, but the evidence, including copies of the notebook, voice recordings, and purchase history, secured a guilty verdict. The legal proceedings led to my successful divorce from Kevin, who had to pay compensation, along with Kay receiving $660 as compensation. I used a portion to build a grave for my father-in-law, a proper place for mourning. After the trial, Catherine and I reported the incident in front of my father-in-law's grave, seeking closure and justice. Later, Catherine shared an IQ test result, revealing her score of 135. Surprised and impressed, I learned about her enrollment in a school for gifted children, where she flourished in an environment that allowed her to study what she loved. Our life together became enriching, filled with happiness and improved well-being. Despite the challenges, living with Catherine proved enjoyable, and our smiles never faded.
I am Liz, and through a curious twist of fate, I find myself bound to the most remarkable man I've ever encountered. Alex, we're both 28, proud owners of our cozy abode, diligently covering our bills while crafting a life uniquely. A year has passed since we exchanged vows, and truth be told, life has been quite pleasant, except for a singular complication: Alex's parents. Now, don't get me wrong. I never anticipated playing the role of the knight in shining armor as the daughter-in-law. However, I certainly didn't envision becoming the family's unwelcome guest either. The inaugural encounter with my in-laws felt akin to entering a lion's den with a stake strapped to my neck. Jane, my mother-in-law, possessed a knack for scrutinizing me, as though pondering whether I was more of an inconvenience or just plain dull. It was evident that she had formed her opinion about me before I could even utter a greeting. Alex had forewarned me about his mom's assertive personality on our way to their place that first time, advising me not to take it too personally. Despite my efforts at dinner while innocently passing the salt, Jane seized the opportunity to reminisce about Stephanie's culinary prowess, referring to me in the third person. Alex, seemingly uncomfortable, acknowledged her remarks without meeting my gaze. Feeling like an invisible presence at the table, I swallowed my discomfort with a forced smile. When I tentatively acknowledged Stephanie's cooking skills, Jane's smile didn't quite reach her eyes. She seemed to be measuring me against a ghost, and I confided in Alex about feeling scrutinized. He reassured me, holding me close and affirming that I was the one he chose. Little did I know that Jane had a more intricate plan in motion, and I was unwittingly cast as the pawn in her familial chess game. Living with a severe allergy is more than just inconvenient. It's akin to having a persistent shadow whispering danger in your ear. Since childhood, peanuts have been my formidable adversaries, leading to an emergency room visit after a mere spoonful of peanut paste. Consequently, my parents received a crystal-clear directive: shield her from peanuts and an array of other foods for her well-being: soy, peas, cherries, almonds, tomatoes, apricots, bananas, and even potatoes. It's a list that raises eyebrows among waiters and prompts hesitation from friends inviting me over for dinner. Jane, my mother-in-law, is well aware of this extensive list. Nevertheless, she manages to question the restrictions every time we dine at her place. Her tone hovering between concern and disbelief persistently suggests that maybe I can indulge just a bit, oblivious to the potential consequences. Once at a family gathering, Jane insisted on the safety of her casserole, only for Alex to discover a potentially hazardous ingredient. Though we gracefully excused ourselves, leaving the untouched casserole behind, the incident lingered as a small victory in an ongoing battle where Jane held all the cards. I've learned to navigate this allergen-laden world with caution, treating every meal outing as a strategic operation. Alex, with his supportive demeanor, accompanies me through this culinary minefield, constantly reassuring me that my cautiousness is justified. Yet, Jane's subtle jabs persist, extending beyond the dinner table. Her texts carry a warning tone, reminding me that not everyone takes my conditions seriously. It's more than a mere jab. It's a reminder of vulnerability, a realization that my allergy is perceived as a weakness to be exploited. Dinners at Jane's house are orchestrated affairs, resembling a play where everyone knows their lines except for the unwitting lead. I, the daughter-in-law, I was the unpredictable element, the wild card capable of unintentionally stirring up a commotion with a single bite. Alex did his best to ease the situation, but there's only so much you can do when you're playing on someone else's home turf. On a particular evening, the tension hung in the air as heavily as the gravy on the table. Jane was bustling around, placing dish after dish on the table. I sat there with my plate empty, anxiously waiting to discern what I could eat without risking a hospital visit. Alex, in his ever-supportive manner, passed the green beans, urging, "They're just divine." Jane's voice dripped with sweetness that failed to reach her eyes. Eyeing the beans, I sensed something was off. "What's in them?" I asked. "Oh, just a touch of almond slivers for crunch," Jane replied, waving a dismissive hand. Halting Alex's reach, I said, "I can't eat those. Almonds are a no-go for me, Jane." Feigning surprise, a hand to her chest, she responded, "Oh dear, I must have forgotten. Silly me." Alex stood up, his chair scraping back, his voice firm with frustration. "Mom, this is serious. Liz could end up in the hospital." Jane's eyes narrowed slightly and she retorted, "I just wanted to make something nice. It's not my fault Liz has all these allergies." The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, forks pausing midair, and embarrassed glances exchanged. Mark, Alex's dad, attempted to diffuse the tension. "Let's just enjoy the meal, shall we? There's plenty Liz can eat," but the damage was done. The rest of the dinner passed in strained politeness, with Jane asking pointed questions about my allergies, as if she were jotting down notes for the next time. Later, when Alex and I were alone, he apologized. "I'm sorry, Liz. I should have double-checked everything before we came. Tired of feeling like a problem to be managed." I responded, "It's not your fault, but I'm starting to think your mom does these things on purpose." He didn't answer, and he didn't need to. We both knew the truth. Jane was serving up a side of malice with every meal, and I was the main course. I could always tell when Jane had been working on Alex. He'd get this distant look in his eyes, as if he were seeing through me, weighing her words against his own judgment. On this particular evening, a cloud seemed to settle over him, and I knew it before he even spoke. "My mom thinks we should consider." "Well, she thinks we might not be thinking about the future enough," Alex muttered, not meeting my eye as he fumbled with the TV remote. "The future?" I asked, a sinking feeling in my gut. "Yeah, kids and your health issues," he continued, the word issues hanging awkwardly in the air between us. "She talked to you about my allergies again, didn't she?" He sighed, setting the remote down. "She's just worried, Liz. She thinks it's a lot for us to handle, especially if we want a family." I bristled, asserting, "We've talked about this. I've managed so far, haven't I? And there are plenty of people with allergies who have kids." Alex ran a hand through his hair, a sign of stress. I know. It's just she has this way of making me doubt things." The room was quiet for a moment, the tension palpable. I reached for his hand, our fingers intertwining. "We're not fighting. We're on the same side, remember?" He nodded, pulling me into a hug. "You and me against the world, right?" "Right," I said. But as I held him, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's words were like weeds threatening to grow wild and choke the life out of the beautiful thing we had. It wasn't just my allergies that needed managing. It was the doubts that could seep into the cracks of even the strongest relationships. The news of my pregnancy was a happy surprise for Alex and me. but a complicated one for everyone else. When we announced it to his parents, Jane's reaction was like watching a robot trying to mimic human emotions, a pause, then a smile that didn't quite match the situation. "We're gonna have a baby, Mom," Alex said, his voice a mix of pride and caution. "That's wonderful," Jane managed to say, the words sounding foreign in her mouth. "We must have a family dinner to celebrate." Celebrations at Jane's were never just celebrations. But I saw the hopeful look in Alex's eyes the night of the dinner arrived, and the house buzzed with relatives. Jane was the perfect hostess, moving gracefully from guest to guest. When she reached us, her smile was practiced. "Congratulations, Liz. This is such a joyous occasion." "Thank you, Jane," I replied, trying to match her formality. "We're excited." Alex wrapped his arm around my waist, a silent thank you for playing along. As dinner approached, I felt the familiar anxiety. A table full of food was a minefield for me, but tonight I hoped would be different. The table was a feast, and I felt every eye on me as I hesitated, my hand hovering over the options. "Go on, dear," Jane urged. "Eat up." "You're eating for two now?" I smiled weakly, choosing the safest options, vegetables and rice, plain and simple. But as I reached for a slice of bread, Jane stopped me. "Actually, maybe not that one," she said quickly. "I'm not sure if the baker used soy flour." I paused, bread in hand, meeting her gaze. There was a flicker of something there, concern, or perhaps it was a challenge. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, placing the bread down. However, warning bells were already ringing in my head. How did she know about the soy flour? It felt like too close a call, too perfect a save. The rest of the meal passed in a blur, with congratulations mingling with the clinking of glasses. Yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that Jane's hospitality was a veneer, concealing a trap set and waiting for just the right moment. The family dinner, meant to celebrate our future baby, was nothing short of a banquet. Jane had outdone herself, creating a spread that would make a Thanksgiving dinner look modest. However, my stomach was tied in knots. Not from hunger. Every dish felt like a potential hazard, a hidden enemy that could send me to the hospital. As we all took our seats, lively chatter filled the air, comprising the usual family gossip and stories. Jane, at the head of the table, presided over the feast like a queen in her court. She called everyone to attention with a gentle tap of her glass. "Before we begin, I just want to say how thrilled we are to be celebrating Liz and Alex's upcoming addition to our family," Jane announced, her voice steady and clear. Applause and cheers followed, and I forced a smile, feeling Alex squeeze my hand under the table. "Thank you, everyone," I said. "We're really looking forward to this new chapter in our lives." The meal began, and I tentatively picked at my food, choosing the simplest items. Alex watched me, his brow furrowed with concern. "You doing okay?" he asked quietly. "Yeah, just being careful," I replied, pushing a roasted potato around my plate. Jane's eyes were on me, and I felt like a specimen under a microscope. "Liz, you haven't touched your salad. The dressing is on the side, just as you like it," she said, her voice tinged with forced cheerfulness. "Thank you, Jane. I'm just not much of an appetite tonight," I said, avoiding the salad that could easily contain hidden allergens. As the dinner wore on, tension grew. Every time Jane offered me something, my anxiety spiked, and the room felt hot, the walls closing in. Then came the cake, a beautiful confection with layers of sponge and cream that drew admiration from the room. Jane cut a slice and handed it to me with a smile that might have been genuine if I hadn't known better. "For the mom-to-be," she said. "I really shouldn't," I said, looking at the cake, then at Alex, then at Jane. "But it looks delicious." "Oh, come on, Liz. One little bite won't hurt. For the baby," Jane pressed, her voice as sweet as the icing. That's when Alex's dad, Mark, stepped in, swiftly knocking the plate from my hands. The cake tumbled to the floor, and stunned silence fell over the room. "What the hell, Dad?" Alex exclaimed, anger and confusion in his voice. Mark stood, his face pale but his voice firm. "I saw the label in the trash. That cake has peanut oil in it." To a room erupted in chaos. Jane's face showed shock, but her eyes betrayed something darker, fear, maybe guilt. Alex stood, his chair clattering behind him. "Mom, did you know about this?" Jane's mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. In that moment, the truth became as clear as the danger on my plate. The room was dead silent after Mark's revelation, the dropped cake like a crime scene on the hardwood floor. Everyone's eyes were locked on Jane, who seemed to shrink under the collective gaze. "Mom? Is it true? Did you know?" Alex's voice cut through the tension, sharp and demanding. Jane looked away, her jaw clenched, and for the first time I saw a hint of fear in her eyes. Maybe she realized that her actions hadn't just endangered me, but jeopardized her relationship with her son, her reputation, everything. The rest of the evening was a blur of arguments, tears, and hushed conversations as the family tried to process what had happened. Alex and I left early, the weight of the evening heavy on our shoulders. We didn't speak much on the drive home. What was there to say? The truth was out, and with it, the facade of a polite, if not happy, family was shattered. The drive home was quiet, filled with a heavy silence, loaded with things left unsaid. When we finally walked through our front door, Alex and I just stood there, the echo of the night's drama still ringing in our ears. Alex was the first to break the silence. "I can't believe my own mother would do something like that," he said, his voice hollow. I sat down on the couch, the cushion failing to comfort me. "I know it's a lot to take in," he said, sitting beside me and taking my hands in his. "I'm so sorry, Liz. This is unforgivable." I looked at him, seeing the pain in his eyes, and my heart ached. "It's not your fault, Alex. We couldn't have known she'd go this far." But the truth was there, hanging between us. Jane had crossed a line, and there was no going back. The family was in pieces. Some stood by us, shocked and appalled by Jane's actions, while others struggled to wrap their heads around the reality of the situation. The next few days were a whirlwind. Alex's phone buzzed constantly with messages and calls from relatives expressing shock, support, and apologies. Through it all, there was deafening silence from Jane. No apologies, no explanations. Alex finally broke the news to me a week later. "My dad's left her. He can't get past what she did," he said, a twinge of something like regret in his tone. He said it's been a long time coming. I wasn't sure how to feel: relief, sadness, pity. "And Jane?" I asked tentatively. "She's not handling it well. She's alone now," Alex replied, a twinge of regret in his tone. We sat in our living room, the walls we'd painted together, the furniture we'd picked out during countless trips to the store. It was our home, filled with our memories, our love. Outside, there was a storm brewing, one that threatened to uproot everything we knew. In that moment, I realized that no matter what happened, we had each other. We were a team about to bring a new life into the world, and that was what mattered. "I love you, Liz," Alex said, pulling me close. "I love you too," I whispered back. The fallout from that night would linger, and the scars it left on our family would take time to heal. But as I looked at Alex, at the life we'd built, and the future we were about to embark on, I knew that we'd weather any storm together. As for Jane, she was a chapter in our lives that we had closed, a story that we wouldn't let define us. From now on, it was just us, our baby, and the road ahead. Whatever it brought, we'd face it together.
I find myself in a predicament, entangled in a web of familial expectations and financial disputes within my marriage. The notion of inheriting my rightful share seems to be slipping away, overshadowed by the relentless pursuit of wealth by my husband and mother-in-law. In the realm of matrimony, one would assume that an inheritance is a natural entitlement. Yet in my case, it appears to be an elusive right, as both my husband and mother-in-law exhibit an unwavering fixation on money. Their covetous tendencies extend beyond mere possession, venturing into the audacious territory of claiming my late father's hard-earned legacy as their own. The audacity of surrendering my father's amassed wealth to these individuals is inconceivable. Unforgivable, in fact. My resolve strengthens with each passing day, and I am determined not to succumb to their voracious desires. Allow me to introduce myself. A 44-year-old navigating the complexities of a 20-year-old marriage. Amidst the delicate balancing act of household responsibilities and a demanding job, my husband John, aged 46, toils away at a supermarket near the station. Our paths crossed during my university years, a chance encounter at the very supermarket where I held a part-time job. Casual dating evolved into marriage at the age of 24, and our union now includes our son, Bill, who recently embarked on his journey into university life this spring. The fabric of my life is woven with fulfilling responsibilities, but a disquieting undercurrent persists: my husband's reckless spending habits. While the right to spend our hard-earned money is undeniable, his unrelenting demands for additional funds, accompanied by a lack of transparency, only serve to exacerbate the situation. In the presence of my husband and his parents, financial matters become a battleground. My resistance to their insatiable demands is met with vehement opposition, and the atmosphere becomes charged with tension. My son, Bill, thankfully, shares my sentiments towards his grandparents and ensures his absence whenever they make an appearance. However, a startling revelation from Bill unveils a new layer of turmoil. The revelation of my husband's infidelity, witnessed firsthand by our son, leaves me more disheartened than angry. Bill, advocating for a divorce, echoes my sentiments. Though reassured by my son's support, I decide to confront my husband before taking any drastic steps. As I prepare to address the issue, an unexpected intrusion occurs. My husband and his parents barge into our living room. Seemingly innocuous, their visit takes a turn when my husband proposes an extravagant trip to Hawaii, accompanied by a demand for a substantial sum of $5,000. Frustration reaches its peak, prompting me to confront them not only about their financial expectations, but also about my husband's infidelity. The room falls silent, and I brace myself for the repercussions of this revelation. Prepared to confront my husband as planned, I confronted him about the allegations of infidelity. His initial response was one of denial and confusion, questioning the need for proof and asserting his innocence. I pointed out that someone had witnessed him entering a hotel with another woman, to which he responded by challenging the credibility of the observer. Frustrated, I hesitated, not wanting my anger to be directed at our son, Bill, who had shared the unsettling revelation. Astonishingly, my mother-in-law dismissed the seriousness of the accusation, suggesting that forgiving a cheat or two is normal for men. I found it incredulous that a woman herself could condone such behavior. However, the urgency shifted to their demand for money for a Hawaii trip, a distraction my husband readily embraced, leaving the matter of his infidelity unresolved. Exasperated with these constant financial disputes and moral insensitivity, I decided that it was time to sever ties. Calmly, I announced that we were getting a divorce. In response, my husband threatened to claim my parents' mansion as part of the property division if the separation proceeded. As tensions escalated during our argument, my cell phone rang, interrupting the heated exchange. It was my uncle, my father's brother, bearing unsettling news. My father had collapsed, lost consciousness, and was rushed to the hospital by ambulance. Urgently summoned to the hospital, I explained the situation to my husband and his parents before departing. Upon arriving at the hospital, I discovered that my father was stable but not in optimal condition. My father, age 67, had dedicated his life to the family business, overcoming initial challenges to provide a comfortable life for us. The news of his sudden health crisis left me emotionally shaken, prompting me to reflect on his irreplaceable role in my life. Days later, my father regained consciousness, alleviating some concerns. Visiting him with Bill, we shared a moment of relief and concern. However, the doctor's subsequent call revealed the severity of my father's condition, exacerbated by years of overwork. In the following days, my father passed away, and grief enveloped me. Throughout this difficult time, Bill remained a steadfast source of support. As an only child, I shouldered the responsibility of funeral preparations, and my husband's indifference only heightened my emotional burden. At the funeral, my in-laws made an appearance, expressing admiration for the family home and insensitive curiosity about its value. In the aftermath of the memorial services, while attempting to come to terms with my father's passing, my in-laws, father-in-law, and mother-in-law made a sudden visit. Their focus, however, remained on the materialistic aspects, with my mother-in-law fixating on the grandeur of the house and my father-in-law probing into its potential value. Their departure, seemingly content with their financial inquiries, left me speechless. As I began to cope with the grieving process and put away funeral clothes at home, a new wave of confusion emerged. My parents were on their way over, and I was left wondering about the purpose of their unexpected visit. My initial apprehension deepened as I awaited the arrival of my parents, anticipating another discussion veering towards financial matters. In a sullen attempt to understand their motives, I resolved to engage in conversation upon their arrival. As they entered, my in-laws wore satisfied grins, taking their places on the sofa. The atmosphere tensed when my husband abruptly suggested we move from our spacious house, proposing that his parents join us in our new abode. Baffled by this sudden proposition, I reiterated my intention to proceed with the divorce, a decision fueled by my commitment to address my late father's affairs. However, my husband, dismissing the notion of infidelity and divorce, casually declared his intent to share everything between spouses. This included the inheritance, a claim he justified as his right as a husband. Their audacious assumption that all the inheritance belonged to them infuriated me, and their whimsical discussions about room preferences in a new mansion only fueled my frustration. Determined to thwart their plans and protect the legacy my father had worked hard to build, I vowed never to let them have their way. The audacity of my husband and his parents, treating my father's house and wealth as if it were rightfully theirs, had pushed my patience beyond its limits. A few days later, a call from my uncle brought a brief respite. His words of comfort and support reassured me that I had done well amidst the challenges. However, the conversation took an unexpected turn when my uncle expressed a pressing need to meet and share crucial information. Intrigued and apprehensive, I agreed to meet him that night. As my uncle disclosed shocking revelations about my husband and in-laws, I found myself grappling with the gravity of the situation. Determined to seek guidance, I confided in my uncle, sharing the preposterous demands and claims made by my husband and in-laws. My uncle, furious at their audacity, assured me that he would handle the situation. Intrigued by my uncle's plan, I eagerly met with him again the following day, this time accompanied by Bill. The plan unfolded, aiming to enlighten Bill about his father and grandparents and prepare him for the challenging road ahead. Braced for the confrontation, I summoned my in-laws to our house, bringing together the 6 of us, my husband, Bill, and the 3 of them. The discussion centered around the prospect of all 6 of us living in my family home. The proposal caught them off guard, and after confirming their seriousness, my mother-in-law enthusiastically endorsed the idea, expressing eagerness to live in what she deemed a dreamlike mansion. The elation, however, was short-lived. Reality struck when my father-in-law reminded us of the cancellation fee for their previously planned trip, insisting on reimbursement. Appalled by their audacious demands, I realized the depth of their selfishness. Unfazed, my mother-in-law reassured us that they would recoup the money soon enough, dismissing the urgency of the situation. Accustomed to my husband and in-laws' relentless pursuit of money, I had grown somewhat immune to their schemes. However, Bill, unaccustomed to their blatant money-grabbing tendencies, appeared visibly upset and angered by their audacity. In an attempt to soothe him, I gently patted Bill's shoulder, assuring him that we would handle the situation. As the conversation revolved around the proposed move into my family home, I decided to play along, knowing well that their assumptions were far from reality. John, my husband, questioned the logistics of the move, displaying an unusual sharpness in his tone. Attempting to deflect the tension, I explained that Bill and I would go ahead to prepare the house, emphasizing that it was a considerable task requiring early action. However, John's skepticism lingered, and he questioned Bill's ability to handle household tasks, especially since he was still a student. I managed to navigate the conversation by suggesting that Bill could manage his responsibilities, though John continued to resist over trivial matters. Despite his resistance, my mother-in-law remained in good spirits, seemingly oblivious to the underlying tension. The conversation inadvertently shifted towards the size of the mansion and the number of rooms, with my mother-in-law expressing excitement. Seizing the opportunity, I assured them that they could choose their rooms first and even proposed a gradual process of tidying up, considering my work schedule. My calculated responses allowed me to temporarily deflect their expectations, leaving them satisfied with their perceived victory. In my mind, I harbored a plan to undermine their assumptions and bring them down from their lofty expectations. The moving day was set a month later, and I eagerly anticipated the final showdown. On the decisive day, my husband and in-laws arrived with a moving truck, expecting to take possession of what they believed to be their new home. Bill and I awaited them in front of the entrance. Ignoring my husband's attempt at humor, I observed the sparkles of excitement in my in-laws' eyes. Little did they know that the impending revelation would shatter their illusions. As my husband made light of the situation, the gate opened, and my uncle, my father's brother, emerged from the house. Silent and imposing, my uncle confronted them, leaving my husband and in-laws puzzled. It became evident that my husband barely remembered my uncle from the funeral. Setting the record straight, my uncle asserted his ownership of the house and clarified the inheritance distribution. The shock on my husband and in-laws' faces grew as they realized the gravity of their misconceptions. Despite my uncle's assertive explanation, my husband remained calm, seemingly attempting to move past the confrontation. In a sudden turn of events, Bill intervened, accusing his father of infidelity. The revelation left my husband shocked and exposed, unable to hide from the truth his son had uncovered. Observing my father entering a hotel with another woman confirmed my suspicions of his infidelity. However, when confronted, he adamantly denied the accusations, refusing to admit to his transgressions. In response, Bill, my son, urged his father to leave our lives, emphasizing the impact of his actions on our family. Despite this plea, my in-laws remained fixated on financial gains, insisting on a proper property division if a divorce were to proceed. My in-laws boldly declared that they had relinquished their apartment and quit their jobs to partake in a life of leisure in the assumed family mansion. Their presumptuous demands left me astounded, especially when they revealed that both my husband and father-in-law had quit their jobs. I questioned their rationale, bewildered by their abrupt decisions and the apparent reliance on my father's inheritance. In response to their audacious claims, I asserted my rightful inheritance as my father's child, anticipating a substantial property division. To my relief, my uncle, a lawyer, intervened to handle the legal proceedings. He exposed my husband's infidelity, supported by evidence gathered during a month-long investigation. The revelation left my husband and in-laws stunned, and they finally began to comprehend the severity of the situation. With my uncle's guidance, I firmly informed them to handle all matters through legal channels and requested they never show their faces to me again. Despite a momentary glare from my husband, they left, and I expressed my gratitude to my uncle for his invaluable support. Following the legal proceedings, Bill and I moved into the family home, fulfilling my father's and grandfather's wishes. Grateful for the opportunity to live in a house filled with memories, I thanked my uncle for the life-changing experience. Bill, having learned from his uncle's guidance, dedicated himself to his studies, aspiring to become a successful lawyer. My ex-husband and his parents found themselves in a challenging situation, residing in an old apartment and struggling to secure new employment. The consequences of their actions began to unravel as my ex-husband reached out for financial assistance. However, having severed all ties, I refused to lend him money, enforcing the newfound estrangement. In the aftermath, my ex-husband's life took an unexpected turn. He resorted to part-time and day jobs, attempting to navigate the consequences of his choices. Their elaborate plan to borrow money for a non-existent luxury trip further exposed the depths of their deception. Grateful for the weight lifted off my shoulders, I focused on my career, with the immediate goal of witnessing Bill successfully graduate from college.